The storm clouds rolled in like an army of the damned, turning the afternoon sky the color of old bruises. In the heart of Thornwick's capital stood the ancient fighting ring, a massive pit carved from blood-stained stone that had drunk the lives of countless warriors over 3 centuries. Today, 5,000 spectators packed the stands, their voices rising in a chant that made the ground tremble. Wolfless scum, murderer, let her bleed. They'd come to watch justice. They'd come to see death. What they didn't know was that the broken girl being dragged into that ring in chains was about to shatter everything they believed about power, bloodlines, and the very throne their new king sat upon. Some executions end in death. This one would end in revolution. If stories of underdogs shattering kingdoms make your pulse race, let me know with a like, because Deanna's transformation is just beginning. Chapter 1. The Execution Spectacle. The fighting ring smelled of rain, sweat, and something darker anticipation. The wooden barriers surrounding the circular pit were weathered and splintered, marked with claw gouges deep enough to fit a fist. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders, craning their necks to see the killing ground below. Merchants hawked meat skewers and ale, their voices blending with the roar of the crowd. Nobles in their fine silks leaned forward from the covered gallery, fans fluttering like trapped birds. This was entertainment. This was justice. This was Alpha King Vincent Watt's coronation celebration. And the people had come to see blood. The chanting started low, a rumble from the common section that spread like wildfire through the crowd. Wolfless scum. Murderer. Feed her to the beasts. The voices rose to a fever pitch, fists pumping in the air, faces twisted with cruel glee. They had been promised a spectacle, and they were hungry for it. In Thornwick, the Wolfless were less than nothing slaves, property, disposable. And a Wolfless who dared raise her hand against nobility? She deserved whatever horror awaited her in that ring. A herald stepped forward onto the royal platform, his voice amplified by the natural acoustics of the stone arena. He wore the king's colors, midnight blue and silver, and carried a scroll that trembled slightly in the rising wind. By decree of Alpha King Vincent Watts, first of his name, Protector of Thornwick, Lord of the 7 Territories. His voice boomed across the fighting ring, and the crowd fell to an expectant hush. The prisoner, Dina Avila, wolfless and without clan, convicted of the murder of Lord Edmund Caldwell, noble son of House Caldwell, shall face trial by combat. The crowd roared its approval. 3 warriors, the herald continued. No weapons, no mercy. Let the moon goddess herself decide if she deserves to live. The roar became deafening. Then came the sound that made even the bloodthirsty pause, the grinding creak of the wooden gate opening on the eastern side of the ring. The crowd pressed forward, desperate to see this wolfless murderer. Some said she was a monster who'd killed the young lord in cold blood. Others whispered she was mad, that she'd torn out his throat with her bare teeth in some feral rage. Many expected a savage thing, twisted and ugly, worthy of the death that awaited her. But what emerged from the darkness of the holding cells made the crowd fall silent. 2 armored guards dragged a woman into the light, chains wrapped around her wrists and ankles. She was small, painfully so, compared to the towering Lycans who ruled Thornwick. Her clothes were torn slave rags, barely more than strips of filthy cloth that had once been brown but were now stained with dirt, blood, and worse. Her feet were bare, leaving red prints on the stone as the guards pulled her forward. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles around her face, obscuring her features. She looked broken, defeated, exactly what they expected. But then she lifted her head. Her gray eyes burned with a fire that had not been extinguished by 3 days of torture in the dungeon cells beneath Lord Caldwell's estate. They were the eyes of someone who had stared into the face of injustice and refused to look away. Not defiant in the loud, reckless way of the young and stupid, but defiant in the quiet, immovable way of someone who had already survived the worst the world could throw at them and was still standing. She didn't bow. She didn't beg. She walked, dragged, yes, but she walked into the center of the fighting ring and stood there, chains clinking softly in the sudden silence. High above on the obsidian throne, Alpha King Vincent Watts watched. He was 28 years old, crowned barely 6 months ago after his father's sudden death from winter fever. The kingdom still whispered about him. Some said he was too young. Others said he was too cold, that he had ice in his veins, where his father had fire. He sat perfectly still, draped in a cloak of black wolf fur that fell from his broad shoulders like a shadow. His armor was polished silver, etched with the ancient symbols of the Watts bloodline. His face could have been carved from marble's strong jaw. High cheekbones, eyes the color of honey gold that missed nothing. He looked like a king from the old stories, powerful, untouchable, dangerous. And as he watched the small, broken woman standing in chains in his fighting ring, his expression remained as cold as winter frost. He raised one hand, just a small movement, and silence fell across the entire arena like a blade cutting through sound. The crowd held its breath. Vincent's royal advisor, an elderly Lycan named Tomas Osborne with a silver-streaked beard, leaned close to the throne. "The first warrior is ready, Your Majesty. Gareth Stone. He hasn't lost a fight in 7 years." Vincent didn't respond. His golden eyes were fixed on the woman in the ring. Something about her stance bothered him, though he couldn't name what. She should be cowering. She should be weeping, begging for mercy. But she just stood there, waiting. "Begin," Vincent said, his voice carrying across the arena with the natural authority of an alpha. The herald's voice boomed again. "Let the first trial begin. Release the warrior." But how had a wolfless slave girl ended up sentenced to death in the Alpha King's fighting ring? What crime could she have possibly committed that warranted such brutal execution? And why, after 3 days of torture, was there still fire in her eyes? The answer lay 3 days in the past, in the kitchens of House Caldwell, where justice had died and a lie had been born. The kitchens of Lord Caldwell's estate were always hot, always loud, and always busy. Deanna had been scrubbing the same section of stone floor for an hour, her knees aching, her hands raw from the harsh lye soap. She was 22 years old, wolfless since birth, and had been property of House Caldwell for as long as she could remember. Orphaned as an infant, sold to the estate as a child, she knew nothing of family or freedom. She knew only work, hunger, and the constant awareness that her life meant nothing to the nobles who owned her. But she'd learned to survive. Keep your head down. Do your work. Don't attract attention. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ever, ever look a noble in the eye. The sound of running footsteps made her look up. Eula Leonard burst through the kitchen door, 14 years old, her serving dress torn at the shoulder, her face streaked with tears. She crashed into the preparation table, sending copper pots clattering to the floor. "Eula!" Dana dropped her scrub brush and rushed to the girl. "What happened?" "Who?" The door slammed open again. Lord Edmund Caldwell staggered in, 19 years old and drunk on wine and privilege. His fine doublet was unbuttoned, his eyes glazed with alcohol and something darker. He saw Eula cowering behind Dina and smiled slow and predatory. "There you are, little dove," he slurred, reaching out with fingers that trembled with wine and lust. "We weren't finished talking." She said, "No, my lord." The words left Dina's mouth before she could stop them. The kitchen went silent. The other servants froze, eyes wide with horror. "You didn't speak to nobles like that. You didn't speak to them at all, unless they asked you a question." Edmund's attention snapped to Deanna like a whip crack. "What did you say?" Deanna felt her heart hammering, but she didn't back down. She'd seen too many girls like Eula used and discarded. She'd been one of them herself years ago, before she'd learned to fight back in the only ways available to the powerless. "She's just a child, my lord. Please, let her go to her quarters. A wolfless slave dares to tell me what to do?" Edmund's voice rose, his Lycan nature flickering at the surface, his eyes flashing amber. "You forget your place, scum." He lunged, not for Eula, but for Deanna. His hand reached to grab her throat, to put her in her place the way nobles always did when property forgot their station. Deanna reacted on instinct. She shoved him hard, both palms against his chest. It should have done nothing. He was Lycan. She was human. The strength difference was insurmountable. But Edmund was drunk, unbalanced, his coordination destroyed by too much wine. He stumbled backward, his boots slipping on the wet floor. Deanna had been scrubbing. His arms windmilled, seeking balance that wasn't there. He fell. The sickening crack of his skull hitting the stone hearth echoed through the kitchen like a death knell. Blood pooled beneath his head, spreading across the gray stone in a dark halo. His eyes stared up at nothing, unfocused and empty. "No," Deanna whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. "No, no, no." She pressed her hands to his head, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to undo what had just happened. "I didn't mean he was just—" The door exploded inward. Lord Caldwell's guards poured in, armored and armed, their eyes going immediately to their master's son lying motionless in a pool of blood. "She killed him," one of them shouted. "Seize her." Deanna tried to explain, tried to tell them it was an accident, that he was drunk, that he was attacking Eula, but no one was listening. Lord Caldwell himself arrived, a mountain of a man with iron-gray hair and eyes like frozen stone. He looked at his son's body, then at Deanna's blood-covered hands, and his face transformed into something inhuman with rage. "You murdered my son," he said, each word precise as a knife cut. "Seize her, lock her in the deepest cell, and find that servant girl." He pointed at Eula, who was still cowering in the corner. "Make sure she understands the price of lying to protect a killer." "My lord, please." Eula tried to speak, tried to tell the truth, but a guard's hand clamped over her mouth and she was dragged away, her screams muffled and fading. Deanna was thrown into the dungeon beneath the estate, into cells that smelled of death and despair. For 3 days they tried to break her. Whips, fire, questions asked in snarls and shouts. "Confess. Tell us you murdered him. Tell us you planned it. Tell us you're a monster." But Deanna had spent her entire life suffering. Pain was an old friend, and she knew with absolute certainty that confession or no confession, she was going to die. Lord Caldwell would never let his son's killer live. Accident or not, the truth didn't matter. Justice didn't exist for the wolfless. So when they demanded her confession, she gave them the only answer that mattered. "I won't lie about protecting an innocent girl." On the 3rd day, they stopped the torture. She was dragged from her cell, chains locked around her wrists and ankles, and told her sentence. Trial by combat in the royal fighting ring during the new Alpha King's coronation celebration. 3 Lycan warriors. No weapons. No mercy. A death sentence dressed up as justice. And now here she stood, in front of 5,000 people screaming for her blood, waiting to die for the crime of refusing to let a young girl be destroyed. The guards unlocked Deanna's chains with rough efficiency, shoving her toward the center of the fighting ring. The moment the metal fell away from her wrists, the crowd erupted again, throwing stones, rotten vegetables, screaming insults that blended into a wall of hatred. A rock struck her shoulder. Another grazed her temple, drawing blood. She didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that showing pain only made them hurt you more. She stood in the center of the blood-stained stone, bare feet planted, and stared straight ahead, not at the crowd, not at the nobles in their gallery, at the sky where storm clouds churned, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. "At least I'll die under an open sky," she thought. Not in a cell, not in chains. It was the only comfort she had. High above, Alpha King Vincent leaned forward slightly, the first crack in his mask of cold indifference. Tomas noticed. "Something wrong, Your Majesty?" Vincent's golden eyes narrowed. "She's not afraid. She should be," Tomas muttered. "Gareth Stone has killed 100 opponents. She's got minutes left to live at best." But Vincent was watching the way she stood straight back despite the bruises covering her body, despite the blood running down her face from where the stone had hit. She stood like someone who had already accepted death and decided it wasn't going to make her kneel. Interesting, he thought. The gate on the opposite side of the ring, massive iron-bound doors 20 feet high, began to open with a grinding shriek of metal on stone. The crowd's roar became deafening. From the darkness beyond the gate, a figure emerged that made even Deanna's breath catch. Gareth Stone was a nightmare given flesh. 7 feet tall in his half-shifted Lycan form, his body was a mass of muscle wrapped in gray-furred skin. Scars covered his torso, each one a story of a fight survived, an opponent defeated. His claws were black and curved like scythes. His eyes glowed amber with his wolf's presence, and when he smiled, his fangs gleamed white as bone. He'd been fighting in this ring for 12 years. 137 victories. 0 defeats. He was the crowd's favorite, a killer who'd never lost. And now he stood across from a barefoot wolfless slave girl who weighed maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Chapter 2. The First Impossible Victory. Gareth cracked his knuckles, each pop loud as a breaking branch. His claws extended another inch, ready to rend flesh from bone. He started walking toward Deanna with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly how this would end. "I'll make it quick, girl," he said, his voice a rumbling growl that carried across the ring. "You don't deserve to suffer for whatever you did. Clean death, that's what I give." Dina watched him approach. She should have been terrified. Every instinct should have been screaming at her to run, to beg, to curl up and wait for the end. Instead, she heard herself say, quiet but clear, "I've been suffering my whole life. What's a few more minutes?" Gareth paused mid-step, surprised. In the stands, nobles exchanged confused glances. On his throne, Alpha King Vincent's expression shifted not much, just the slightest tilt of his head, the barest narrowing of his eyes. Curiosity. The drums began to beat. Deep, resonant, ancient. The rhythm that marked the beginning of every fight in the ring. The countdown to blood and death. Boom. 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 Gareth's muscles tensed. Boom. 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 Deanna's heart hammered in time with the drums. Boom. 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 Gareth launched himself forward at inhuman speed, claws extended, aiming for a quick kill. Throat or heart, it didn't matter. Both would end it fast. Deanna didn't run. She waited. Feet planted on the blood-stained stone. Gray eyes locked on the monster charging toward her. 3 seconds before 7 feet of Lycan warrior would tear her apart. 3 seconds to do the impossible. 3 seconds to survive. And as Gareth's shadow fell across her, as his claws cut through the rain-thick air toward her exposed throat, Deanna made a choice that would shock them all. She moved. At the last possible second, she dropped and rolled to her left, her body moving on pure survival instinct. Gareth's claws whistled past her head, missing her jugular by inches. The momentum of his charge carried him forward, and he stumbled, surprised that his target was no longer where she should be. Deanna's hands hit the ground, and she felt it the coarse, blood-stained sand that covered the fighting ring's stone floor. Without thinking, she grabbed a fistful and spun toward Gareth as he turned to face her. She threw it directly into his eyes. Gareth roared, a sound of rage and shock that echoed off the arena walls. He clawed at his face, his enhanced vision temporarily blinded by the grit. It would only last seconds, his Lycan healing would clear it fast, but seconds were all Deanna needed. She kicked. Not a wild kick, but a precise strike at his knee joint, the one vulnerable spot she could reach on his massive frame. Her bare foot connected with a crack that was part bone, part cartilage. It wasn't enough to break she was human, after all, but it was enough to make him stagger. The crowd's jeers turned uncertain. Confused muttering rippled through the stands. High on his throne, Alpha King Vincent sat forward, his golden eyes narrowing with something that might have been interest. "Interesting," he murmured, too quietly for anyone but Tomas to hear. But the moment of advantage was already over. Gareth's vision cleared with a few hard blinks, and the rage that followed was a terrible thing. He wasn't amused anymore. He wasn't merciful. He was embarrassed, and that made him dangerous. "Clever," he snarled, "but not enough." His massive hand swung in a backhand strike that caught Deanna across the ribs before she could dodge. The impact lifted her off her feet and sent her flying across the ring. She crashed into the wooden barrier with a bone-jarring crack, and the taste of copper flooded her mouth. Blood. Her ribs screamed in agony, at least 2 of them cracked. Maybe more. Her vision blurred, and for a moment the world tilted sideways. Gareth advanced slowly now, limping slightly on his injured knee, but far from defeated. "I gave you the chance for a clean death. Now you'll suffer for making a fool of me." Deanna spat blood onto the sand and tried to breathe through the pain. Every inhale was knives in her chest, but she'd felt pain before. Pain was familiar. Pain meant she was still alive, and as long as she was alive, she could fight. She'd learned to fight in the slave quarters of House Caldwell, where the strong preyed on the weak and no one came to save you. Street fighting. Dirty fighting. The kind of fighting where there were no rules, no honor, only survival. Use anything. Attack anywhere. Never stop moving. As Gareth reached down to grab her throat, Dina's hand closed around a long splinter of wood that had broken off the barrier. Without hesitation, without mercy, she drove it into his already injured knee with all the strength she had left. Gareth's scream was almost music to her ears. His leg buckled, and the massive warrior dropped to one knee, his hands going instinctively to the wound. Dina didn't waste the opening. She scrambled behind him, moving on adrenaline and desperation, and grabbed the chain that had bound her wrists. The guards had left it lying in the sand. She wrapped it around Gareth's thick neck and pulled. Her human strength wasn't enough to crush his windpipe, wasn't enough to kill him, but it was enough to choke. Enough to cut off the oxygen his brain needed. Gareth's hands came up, trying to grab her, trying to reach back and tear her off. His lichened strength was overwhelming, but it was fading with every second he couldn't breathe. Sleep, Deanna hissed in his ear, pulling tighter. Just sleep. Gareth's struggles grew weaker. His hands dropped, and finally, with a shuddering exhale, the massive warrior collapsed forward into the sand, unconscious. Deanna released the chain and stumbled backward, her chest heaving, her whole body shaking. She'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, she'd survived. The arena fell into stunned silence. Then came the muttering, confused, uncertain. Nobles leaning toward each other, whispering frantically. Common wolves staring with wide eyes, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. A wolfless slave had just defeated the king's champion. On his throne, Vincent's expression remained unreadable, but his mind was racing. She fights like someone with nothing to lose, he said quietly to Tomas. Dangerous. Medical attendants rushed into the ring to drag Gareth's unconscious body out. The crowd watched them go, then turned back to Dina. She was barely standing. Blood dripped from her mouth onto the sand. She hugged her ribs with one arm, each breath a battle. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. By all rights, she should collapse, should surrender, should beg for mercy. Instead, she looked up. Her gray eyes found the obsidian throne, found the golden-eyed king watching her. For a moment, something passed between them across that distance. Not words, not even understanding, just acknowledgement. He saw her, really saw her, and she saw him. Then the moment broke, and Dina looked away, focusing on staying upright. The massive iron-bound doors groaned open again. The second warrior entered, and Deanna's heart sank. Peggy Wright moved like water, like smoke, like death itself. She was leaner than Gareth, standing perhaps 6 feet tall in her half-shifted form. But what she lacked in raw power, she made up for in speed. Her muscles were defined like steel cables beneath gray-streaked fur. Her claws were longer, thinner, made for precision strikes. Her eyes glowed amber, but they were calculating, strategic. She studied Deanna the way a predator studies prey, noting every injury, every weakness. I won't underestimate you like he did, wolfless one, Peggy said, her voice surprisingly soft, almost respectful. You're clever. You're desperate. That makes you dangerous. But it won't be enough. Deanna said nothing. She didn't have the breath for banter. She just watched, waiting for the attack. It came faster than she expected. Peggy lunged, but not directly. She came in at an angle, testing Deanna's reactions, forcing her to move. Deanna dodged left, and Peggy was already there, claws slashing. Deanna ducked, and Peggy's foot swept at her legs. This wasn't a brawl. This was a chess match played at lethal speed. Peggy drove Deanna around the ring, forcing her to keep moving despite her cracked ribs, despite her exhaustion. Every step was agony. Every dodge pulled at muscles already pushed past their limits. But Deanna's smaller size became an advantage. She could turn faster, slip under strikes that would have caught a larger opponent. She was fighting on instinct now, her body moving before her mind could process the attacks. You're good, Peggy admitted, pressing the attack. But I'm better. She cornered Deanna against the barrier, and for a moment, Deanna had nowhere to go. Peggy smiled, knowing she had the kill. She lunged forward, claws extended, aiming for Deanna's heart. Deanna dropped flat to the ground. Peggy's momentum carried her forward, and she crashed face first into the wooden barrier with a sickening crack. Dazed, she tried to pull back, but Deanna was already moving. She tore her sleeve completely off the fabric was already hanging in tatters and wrapped it around Peggy's head, blinding her. Then, using every ounce of strength she had left, Deanna grabbed Peggy's shoulders and used the warrior's own disorientation against her, slamming her face first into the stone ground beneath the sand. The impact echoed through the arena. Peggy didn't get up. The crowd was no longer laughing, no longer jeering. They stared in shock, in disbelief, in something that might have been the first stirrings of awe. "How is she still alive?" a noble whispered. "She's just human," another said, as if trying to convince himself of something that no longer made sense. This shouldn't be possible. But the common wolves in the cheap seats were starting to look at Deanna differently, not as entertainment, not as a condemned criminal, as something else entirely. Alpha King Vincent stood from his throne. It was the first time he'd moved since the trials began, and every eye in the arena turned to him. Tomas leaned close, concerned. "Your Majesty." Vincent's golden eyes never left Deanna's bloodied form. She was swaying on her feet, barely conscious, holding her ribs with one arm. She'd defeated two of his best warriors through nothing but desperation and intelligence. She'd earned something. Respect, perhaps, or at least a warrior's death. "Send in Captain Wilson," Vincent said. "But sire," Tomas protested. "The captain of your guard? For a slave girl?" "She's earned it," Vincent replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Send Captain Wilson Williamson." The massive doors, larger than the ones that had released the first two warriors, began to open with a grinding shriek of metal that sent chills down every spine in the arena. Wilson emerged from the shadows like a legend made flesh. He stood 6'5", fully armored in the midnight blue and silver plate of the Royal Guard. His helmet bore the king's crest, and his sword, a massive blade that would take most men 2 hands to wield, hung easily in one. He was Vincent's childhood friend, his most trusted warrior, the captain of his personal guard, undefeated in 15 years of service. A man who'd fought in wars, put down rebellions, and never once shown mercy to an enemy. He walked toward the fighting ring with measured steps, each one echoing like a funeral drum. But something was wrong. As Wilson descended the steps toward the ring, his pace began to slow. His head turned slightly, studying the small, bloodied woman standing in the center of the sand. Her face, the shape of her jaw, those gray eyes, even dulled with pain and exhaustion. The way she held herself straight back despite everything, refusing to bow. Wilson's steps faltered. 20 years ago. A different face, but the same eyes, the same stubborn tilt of the chin. Lady Helena Thorne, the woman he'd helped murder on the orders of the old king. The woman who'd fought like a demon to protect her baby daughter, who'd died with fire and defiance in her eyes. A baby crying in the burning manor. Orders to find and kill the child. The chaos, the smoke, the screams of the dying. They'd searched for hours, but the baby was never found. Lost in the chaos, they'd assumed. Dead, they'd hoped. But what if she wasn't? Wilson entered the ring and removed his helmet slowly. His face was weathered, scarred from a dozen battles. But in that moment, it was pale as death. Deanna saw the look in his eyes, horror, recognition, guilt, and didn't understand it. Who was this man? Why was he looking at her like he'd seen a ghost? Wilson stepped closer, his sword still sheathed, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Deanna could hear. "What was your mother's name?" Deanna blinked, confused by the question. I never knew her. I was told she died when I was born." The blood drained from Wilson's face. His hands began to tremble just slightly, but enough to be visible. Enough for Vincent, watching intently from his throne, to notice. Wilson had never hesitated. Not once in all the years Vincent had known him. Not in battle, not in crisis, not when faced with impossible odds. But he was hesitating now. Slowly, as if the weight of the world pressed down on him, Wilson drew his sword. The blade sang as it left its scabbard, the sound cutting through the tense silence. He raised it, positioning for a killing strike. His hands shook. Captain Wilson Williamson, the king's most deadly warrior, prepared to deliver the killing blow. But his hands shook with the weight of a 20-year-old secret, a secret that would change everything. A secret written in the gray eyes of the dying girl before him, eyes that matched the woman he'd murdered 2 decades ago. And in that moment, standing in the blood-soaked sand with his sword raised, Wilson realized that some ghosts never truly die. They just wait for the right moment to return. Chapter 3. The Captain's Secret. Wilson's sword hung in the air, trembling like a leaf in a storm. The blade caught the dim light filtering through the storm clouds, casting silver reflections across the blood-soaked sand. Deanna stood before him, swaying, barely conscious, her gray eyes unfocused with exhaustion and pain. She was too tired to dodge, too broken to fight. She'd survived 2 impossible battles, but there was no surviving this. Wilson Williamson was the king's champion. He'd never lost, never hesitated except now. High on his throne, Vincent's golden eyes narrowed, watching every micro-expression that crossed his captain's face. Something was wrong. In 15 years of friendship, through wars and rebellions and impossible odds, Vincent had never seen Wilson hesitate. Not once. "Do it," Deanna whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain that had begun to fall harder. "Just make it quick." Something broke in Wilson's expression. Grief, guilt, the weight of 20 years of lies crushing down on him all at once. His claws extended with a sound like knives being drawn, and he struck. The claws pierced Deanna's chest, driving through skin and muscle, aiming for her heart. She gasped, not a scream, just a soft sound of surprise and pain. Her eyes went wide, blood erupted from the wound, dark red against her pale skin, soaking through her torn rags. Wilson pulled back, and Deanna staggered. Her hand went to her chest, fingers coming away slick with blood. She looked down at the wound, then up at Wilson with an expression of almost childlike confusion. "I'm sorry," Wilson whispered, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Helena, I'm so sorry." Deanna fell. She collapsed backward onto the blood-soaked earth, her body hitting the ground with a soft thud that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden hush. Blood pooled beneath her, spreading across the sand like a dark flower blooming. The crowd erupted. Finally the execution they'd been promised, the justice they demanded. They roared their approval, their bloodlust satisfied at last. But Wilson wasn't celebrating. He stood over Deanna's body, his sword hanging limp in his hand, breathing hard. His eyes were fixed on her face, on the blood spreading beneath her, on the life draining away. And he waited. Because he knew, with a certainty that came from the deepest part of his wolf, that this wasn't over. Deanna's blood began to glow. It started as a shimmer, so faint it might have been a trick of the light. Then the shimmer became a glow silver at first, like liquid moonlight spreading through the sand. The crowd's cheers began to falter, confusion rippling through their ranks. "What's happening?" someone shouted. "Look at her blood." The silver brightened to white, so bright it hurt to look at directly. The light spread from the blood pooling beneath Deanna, crawling up her body like living fire. On Deanna's forehead, beneath the blood and dirt and bruises, something burned into existence. A mark, a crescent moon surrounded by stars, glowing golden against her pale skin, the ancient symbol of the moon goddess herself. A mark that hadn't been seen in Thornwick for over 3 centuries. The mark of the moon blessed bloodline. The original rulers. The ones who were supposed to be extinct. Every wolf in the kingdom felt it, a pressure in their chests, sudden and overwhelming. Their wolves whimpered, cowed, pressed themselves flat in submission to something ancient and powerful and undeniable. In homes throughout the capital, Lycans fell to their knees without knowing why. In the palace, servants clutched at their hearts. In the fighting ring, 5,000 spectators gasped as one. Deanna's body convulsed. Her back arched off the ground, bending at an impossible angle. The sound that came from her throat wasn't human anymore. It was a scream that became a howl, raw and primal and filled with 3 centuries of grief and rage. Bones cracked, not breaking but reshaping, growing. Her body expanded rapidly, muscle and sinew erupting from beneath her skin. White fur spread across her body like snow falling in reverse, pure as fresh powder, glowing with that same impossible light. Her hands became massive paws tipped with silver claws, her face elongated into a muzzle lined with fangs like daggers. She grew 8 feet tall on all fours, massive and powerful, and terrifyingly beautiful. Every muscle was defined with power. Every line of her body spoke of strength that made the half-shifted warriors look like children playing at being dangerous. Her eyes opened, no longer gray, no longer human. They glowed like twin full moons, white, silver, and ancient, holding the weight of generations in their luminous depths. Diana Avila, the wolfless slave, the condemned murderer, the broken girl who should have died in this ring, was gone. In her place stood the white lichen. The presence that radiated from her was overwhelming, ancient, primal, undeniable. It pressed down on every wolf in the arena like a physical weight, demanding submission, demanding recognition, demanding acknowledgement of what she was, the rightful heir to Thornwick's throne. The crowd fell silent. The bloodthirsty roar died in their throats, replaced by something that might have been awe, or might have been terror, or might have been both. Then the wolves began dropping to their knees. It wasn't voluntary. Their wolves simply took over, forcing their human forms down in submission whether they wanted to or not. Guards in full armor collapsed, their swords clattering to the stone. Nobles in their fine silks found themselves kneeling in the mud, unable to resist. Common wolves dropped like wheat before a scythe, tears streaming down their faces as something deep in their souls recognized what stood before them. Screams echoed through the stands. "What is that thing?" "The white lichen, it can't be. We're all going to die." Wilson Williamson dropped his sword and fell to his knees, his whole body shaking. Tears streamed down his scarred face, cutting tracks through the blood and dirt. "The white lichen," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Princess Helena's daughter, you survived." His voice carried in the shocked silence, reaching the nobles in their gallery, the guards on the walls, the king on his throne. A noble shouted down, voice shrill with panic. "Princess? What are you talking about? There is no princess." But Wilson wasn't listening. He was staring at Diana's transformed form, seeing the face of the woman he'd murdered 20 years ago reflected in those glowing eyes. The white lichen rose to her full height, standing on her hind legs. She towered over everyone in the ring, a figure of legend made flesh. Every muscle rippled with power. Her white fur was almost blindingly bright, even in the storm's dim light. The mark on her forehead glowed golden, pulsing with ancient magic. She threw back her massive head and howled. The sound shook the very foundations of the kingdom. It wasn't just a howl, it was a proclamation, a declaration, a challenge, and a promise all at once. The sound carried for miles, rolling across the capital like thunder, reaching into every home, every street, every corner of Thornwick. Every wolf in the city, in the entire kingdom, heard it in their souls. Windows shattered from the force of it. Torches guttered out as if blown by a great wind. The storm overhead broke fully, rain falling in sheets, and thunder echoed her howl as if the sky itself was answering her call. In the arena, wolves clutched at their chests, feeling an ancient call in their blood, something their ancestors had known, something that had been lost and was now found. The nobles looked at each other with expressions of terror mixed with recognition. Some of them were old enough to remember the stories their grandparents told. Stories of the moon-blessed bloodline, stories of the white lichen that appeared once every 1,000 years to restore balance. Stories they'd been told were just myths. On his throne, Alpha King Vincent's face drained of all color. His knuckles were white where he gripped the obsidian armrests, the only sign of the battle raging inside him. His wolf was screaming at him to submit, to kneel, to acknowledge the true Alpha. But his human mind fought against it, holding on to the crown, the throne, the power he'd inherited, and in his mind, his grandmother's voice echoed like a ghost. 6 months ago. The memory crashed over Vincent like a wave, dragging him back to that cold winter morning when Queen Mother Isolde lay dying in her bed. She'd been 89 years old, her body failing, but her mind still sharp as a blade. Vincent had sat beside her, holding her frail hand, watching the woman who'd raised him after his mother's death slip away. "Vincent," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible, "there's something you must know." She'd reached under her pillow with trembling fingers and pulled out a sealed letter, the wax bearing her personal crest. "Open it only if the white lichen ever returns." Vincent had laughed, not cruelly, but with the gentle disbelief of someone humoring an elderly woman's fantasies. "Grandmother, that's just a legend. The first bloodline is extinct. My father made sure of that." "No." Her grip on his hand had tightened with surprising strength. "Your father made sure everyone believed that. But legends exist for a reason. My boy. Legends exist for a reason." She died before she could explain, the light fading from her eyes as the letter fell onto the blanket between them. 3 days later, alone in his chambers, Vincent had stared at that sealed letter for hours. He told himself not to open it, that it was just an old woman's guilt over things that had happened before he was born, that the past was dead and buried. But curiosity had won. He'd broken the seal and read his grandmother's final words. "My dearest Vincent, if you're reading this, the impossible has happened. The white lichen has returned. Your father was a great king, but he built his throne on genocide. He murdered the Thorn family, the true moon-blessed bloodline, because they discovered his corruption, his dealings with enemy kingdoms, his plans to consolidate power through fear rather than wisdom. When the white lichen rises from blood-soaked earth, the false throne must bow or the kingdom shall burn. This is not a threat. This is prophecy, written in our oldest texts, known to every queen mother who has come before me. The usurper's line must kneel or be destroyed. I tell you this not to burden you with guilt for your father's sins, but to give you a choice he never had. Choose honor over power, my grandson. Choose what's right over what's easy. Choose the kingdom's future over your family's pride. The white lichen is not your enemy. She is Thornwick's salvation. With all my love, Grandmother Isolde." Vincent had burned the letter that night, watching the parchment curl and blacken in the fireplace. He dismissed it as an old woman's superstition, her guilt over marrying into a family built on blood. But now, staring at the massive white lichen standing in his fighting ring, every word of that letter blazed in his mind like fire. The prophecy was real. The white lichen had returned, and the choice his grandmother had warned him about was here. In the stands, movement caught Wilson's attention. Lord Caldwell was trying to flee, pushing through the crowd of kneeling wolves, his face twisted with terror and recognition. "Seize Lord Caldwell!" Wilson shouted, his voice carrying over the rain and the murmurs. "He's fleeing." Guards near Caldwell grabbed him, their hands like iron on his arms. He struggled, screaming, "Let me go. That beast will kill us all. We're all dead. We're all—" "Bring him forward," Wilson said, standing on shaking legs. The guards dragged Caldwell through the mud and forced him to his knees before the white lichen. She stood wrapped in power and ancient fury, the mark on her forehead pulsing with golden light. Wilson turned to face the crowd, addressing all 5,000 witnesses. "Lord Caldwell knows what she is." Wilson's voice rang out like a bell. "He led the raid that murdered the Thorn family 20 years ago." The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sounded like wind through a canyon. "I was there," Wilson continued, his voice breaking with emotion. "I followed orders. We attacked at midnight on King Edmund's command. We slaughtered the moon-blessed bloodline Lord Julian Thorn, Lady Helena Thorn, their servants, their guards. We burned their manor to the ground." He pointed at the white lichen, his hand trembling. "That is Princess Diana Thorn, daughter of Lady Helena Thorn, rightful heir to the moon-blessed throne. She was 1 year old when we attacked. We searched for her but never found her. We thought she died in the fire." He fell to his knees again, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper that somehow still carried. "But she survived. Hidden. Sold into slavery. Robbed of her name and her birthright. And now the moon goddess has revealed the truth." Chaos erupted in the stands. Nobles were screaming, demanding explanations, calling for the guards. Common wolves were shouting questions, some crying, some laughing with something that might have been hope. The truth was spreading like wildfire. Impossible to contain. Lord Caldwell was screaming, "Lies. All lies. She's a monster. Kill her before," but no one was listening to him anymore. All eyes were on the white lichen standing in the center of the ring, glowing with ancient power, rain streaming off her white fur. And all eyes were on the king. Alpha King Vincent stood from his throne. The movement cut through the chaos like a knife. Every eye in the arena turned to him, watching, waiting to see what he would do. His royal guard moved immediately to surround him, hands on their weapons, ready to defend their king against the beast in the ring. Vincent raised one hand. "Stand down, Your Majesty," Tomas protested. "Stand down," Vincent repeated, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha. "That's an order." He began walking down the steps toward the fighting ring. Each step echoed in the sudden silence, steady and measured. The rain fell harder, soaking his fur cloak, running down his armor. But he didn't pause. Nobles were shouting from their gallery. "Your Majesty, no! Kill the beast! Protect the throne! Don't go near it!" But Vincent ignored them all. His face was set with grim determination, his golden eyes locked on the massive white form that stood in the center of the blood-soaked ring. The white lichen watched him approach, her glowing eyes tracking his every movement. A low growl rumbled in her chest, a sound that made the ground tremble. Alpha King Vincent had conquered armies, defeated enemies, ruled with absolute authority. He'd never backed down from a fight, never shown weakness, never let fear dictate his choices. But now he faced a choice that would define not just his reign, but his very soul. In the blood-soaked fighting ring stood the living proof of his father's sins, the heir to a throne stolen through genocide, the white lichen of legend, returned to claim what was rightfully hers. And the entire kingdom watched to see what he would do. Would he protect his stolen crown with more blood? Or would he choose the path his grandmother had begged him to take? The answer would change everything. Chapter 4. The Crown in the Mud. Vincent's boots echoed on the stone steps as he descended from his throne. Each footfall a drumbeat marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. The rain fell harder now, streaming down his face, soaking through his fur cloak until it hung heavy on his shoulders. But he didn't notice the cold or the weight. His mind was a storm more violent than the one overhead. My father murdered her family to steal the throne. The thought circled in his head like a vulture. He'd known, on some level, that his father's reign hadn't been clean. No reign ever was. But genocide? The systematic slaughter of the moon-blessed bloodline? That was something else entirely. I built my crown on the graves of innocents. He reached the bottom of the steps. The entrance to the fighting ring loomed before him. And beyond it, the massive white form of the lichen that should not exist, that could not exist according to everything he'd been taught. His royal guards moved to block his path, weapons drawn, faces pale with fear and confusion. "Your Majesty, you can't," one began. "Step aside," Vincent commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha. Now, they stepped aside. "I could kill her," Vincent thought as he entered the blood-soaked arena. "She's powerful, but I have an army. Archers in the towers, warriors in the stands. I could end this threat before it grows." Rain mixed with blood on the ground, turning the sand into rust-colored mud. He walked forward, his steps steady despite the war raging in his soul. But my grandmother's words echo. Choose honor over power. Choose what's right over what's easy. The white lichen tracked his approach with glowing eyes that held the weight of centuries. A low growl rumbled in her massive chest, vibrating through the earth beneath Vincent's feet. She was ready to fight, ready to kill if necessary. Every muscle in her powerful frame was tensed, prepared for him to attack. Vincent stopped 3 feet away from her. Man and legend stood facing each other in the rain. The newly crowned king who'd inherited a throne built on lies, and the white lichen who'd risen from the grave to reclaim her birthright. The crowd held its collective breath. 5,000 people waited in absolute silence, watching to see which would strike first. Nobles were pale with fear, their fine clothes soaked and forgotten. Common wolves watched with something that might have been hope flickering in their eyes. Wilson still knelt in the mud, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the rain. Vincent met the white lichen's glowing eyes. In their depths, he saw pain, rage, confusion, and beneath it all, the same question he'd been asking himself. What happens now? He spoke, his voice loud enough to carry across the entire arena despite the storm. Princess Diana Thorne. Each word was deliberate, clear, undeniable. Daughter of Helena and Julian Thorne, heir to the moon-blessed throne. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some had heard Wilson's confession, but hearing it from their king's lips made it real, made it undeniable. Slowly, deliberately, Vincent reached up with both hands. His fingers found the crown, midnight blue sapphire set in silver, etched with the symbols of his family. The crown that had sat on Watt's heads for 3 generations. The crown his father had worn. His grandfather. The symbol of everything he was. He lifted it from his head. The crowd's gasps turned to shocked murmurs. Nobles were shouting. What is he doing? Has he gone mad? But Vincent ignored them all. He held the crown in his hands, rain washing over the precious metals, and he looked down at it. How much blood had been spilled for this circle of metal and stone? How many lives destroyed? How many lies told? My father built this throne on your family's blood, Vincent said, his voice carrying both power and pain. He told the kingdom your line was corrupt, that the moon goddess had abandoned you, that you were traitors who deserved death. He lifted his gaze back to the white lichen's glowing eyes. He lied. The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of shock spreading through the arena. I am my father's son, Vincent continued. I carry his sins. His blood runs in my veins, and his crimes stain my crown. He paused, rain streaming down his face. But I don't have to be his legacy. Then, with a movement that would be spoken of for generations, Alpha King Vincent Watts lowered himself to one knee. The mud soaked into his fine clothes. Rain pounded on his bowed head. He placed the crown on the ground before the white lichen's massive form, a king's crown in the mud at the feet of the rightful heir. He bowed his head. I kneel before the true heir of Thornwick, he said, his voice steady despite the enormity of what he was doing. My family's crime is written in your blood. I will not compound it with more injustice. The arena erupted. Stunned silence shattered into chaos. Nobles were screaming. He's surrendering the throne. This is madness. Someone stop him. Seize the king. Protect him from himself. But the royal guard stood frozen, looking at each other with wide eyes, uncertain what to do. Their king had just knelt before an enemy. Their king had just acknowledged that enemy as the rightful ruler. What were they supposed to do with that? Wilson Williamson stood on shaking legs. He walked through the mud to Vincent's side, and without hesitation, he also dropped to one knee. I was part of the raid that murdered your family, Princess, Wilson said, his voice breaking. I followed orders, but that doesn't absolve me. I offer my life as payment for my crime. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of the royal guards stepped forward and knelt. Then another. Then 2 more. The wave spread through the arena like wildfire. Soldiers in the stands knelt. Common wolves fell to their knees faster. Their wolves recognizing true authority, feeling the pull of the moon-blessed bloodline in their very souls. The pressure to submit was overwhelming, primal, undeniable. Within minutes, 4,000 of the 5,000 people in the arena were kneeling. Only the conspirator nobles remained standing, those who'd benefited from King Edmund's coup, who'd grown rich on stolen lands and blood money. They stood exposed and alone, trapped by their own defiance. A single voice rose from the common section, raw and powerful. Long live Princess Diana. Another voice joined it. Long live the white lichen. More voices, building like a wave. Long live the true queen. The chant grew, spreading through the kneeling masses until it became a roar that rivaled the thunder overhead. Long live Princess Diana. Long live the white lichen. The white lichen stood motionless, her glowing eyes taking in the scene. The kneeling king, the confessing murderer, the chanting crowd. All of it was justice. Not the violent, bloody justice she might have expected, but something else. Something that felt like truth finally being spoken after 20 years of lies. Her body began to change. The blinding glow faded to a soft shimmer. White fur receded, pulling back into her skin. Her massive frame began to shrink, bones cracking as they reshaped themselves into human proportions. The transformation was gentler this time, less violent, but no less painful. Dina collapsed to her knees, human again. She was naked, vulnerable, covered in blood and mud and rain. The mark on her forehead still glowed, but softer now, a gentle pulse of golden light rather than the blazing beacon it had been. Vincent immediately stood and removed his heavy cloak. He stepped forward and wrapped it around her shoulders, covering her, protecting her modesty, even as she just held his entire kingdom in her power. Deanna looked up at him. Her eyes were gray again, human, but they still held a faint glow, a reminder of what she'd become, what she was. Their gazes met, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them in the rain. "Why?" she whispered, her voice raw from screaming, from transformation, from everything. "You could have killed me. You could have protected your throne." Vincent's expression was gentle, sadder than she'd expected. "Because some thrones aren't worth the blood they're built on." Deanna swayed, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. The transformation, the fighting, the days of torture, all of it caught up to her at once. She would have collapsed, but Vincent caught her, his arms steady and strong. "Easy," he said softly. "You've been through enough." Wilson approached cautiously, his weathered face streaked with tears. "Princess, I have no right to ask, but please let me explain what happened that night. Let me tell you about your parents." Deanna looked at him, this man who'd helped murder her family, and nodded weakly. "Then speak. The kingdom deserves the truth." Wilson stood before the entire arena, rain streaming down his face, and began. 20 years ago, King Edmund ordered the royal guard to raid the Thorn Manor. His voice carried across the silent crowd. He said they were traitors planning to overthrow him. He said they'd made deals with enemy kingdoms, that they were a threat to Thornwick's safety. He paused, his face twisted with grief. It was all lies. The Thorn family had discovered King Edmund's corruption, his secret deals with raiders, his embezzlement of kingdom funds, his plans to consolidate power by eliminating the old noble families who opposed him. They were going to expose him, the crowd murmured, shock rippling through their ranks. "We attacked at midnight," Wilson continued. "Lady Helena fought like a demon to protect her daughter, barely 1 year old. I still see her face in my nightmares. Lord Julian died defending his family, taking down 5 guards before he fell." His voice broke. "In the chaos, the fire, the smoke, the baby disappeared. We searched for hours but never found her. King Edmund declared the entire bloodline dead. Case closed. We were ordered never to speak of it again on pain of death." Wilson fell to his knees again in the mud. The manor was torn down. The lands were redistributed. The Thorn name was erased from history. "I have lived with this guilt every day for 20 years. I deserve death, Princess. I deserve whatever punishment you give me." In the stands, Lord Caldwell suddenly lurched into motion, trying to flee. Guards tackled him immediately, their hands iron on his arms as he struggled and screamed. "She's a monster," Caldwell shrieked, his composure completely shattered. "Kill her before she destroys us all. She'll burn the kingdom. Bring him forward," Deanna said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. The guards dragged Caldwell through the mud and forced him to his knees before Deanna. She stood wrapped in Vincent's cloak, the mark on her forehead pulsing with golden light. "You framed me for your son's death because you recognized me," Deanna said. "It wasn't a question." Caldwell spat at her feet. "You look just like your cursed mother. Those same gray eyes, that same stubborn face. I knew you the moment I saw you in my kitchens. Knew you'd be trouble eventually, so I got rid of you." "Where is the girl?" Deanna demanded. "Eula. The servant. Your son attacked." Caldwell stayed silent, his jaw clenched. "Find her," Vincent commanded his guards. "Search the dungeons. Now." 20 minutes later, they brought Eula forward. She was terrified, shaking, her face bruised from where guards had beaten her to keep her quiet. When she saw Deanna, tears streamed down her face. "Tell them what happened," Deanna said gently. Through sobs, Eula told the truth. How Edmund had cornered her, how he'd torn her dress, how Deanna had stepped between them, how Edmund had fallen when he was drunk and unbalanced, how it was an accident, how Lord Caldwell had dragged Eula away and threatened to kill her entire family if she spoke. The crowd's anger, which had been directed at Deanna hours before, turned fully toward Lord Caldwell. The nobles who'd been calling for her death now looked at him with disgust. Deanna looked at Vincent, her gray eyes meeting his golden ones. "Your father stole my family. Your crown is built on my blood. What happens now? That's not for me to decide anymore." Vincent said quietly. You're the rightful heir. The kingdom is yours. Deanna shook her head slowly. I've been a slave, not a princess. I don't know how to rule a kingdom. I don't know laws or diplomacy, or how to lead armies. I barely know how to read. Neither did I when I was crowned 6 months ago, Vincent admitted. But we learn. We grow into what we need to become. Deanna stood silent for a long moment, rain falling around her, 5,000 people waiting for her judgment. The white lichen had returned. The rightful heir stood revealed. She could claim the throne, execute her enemies, reshape the kingdom with fire and blood, or she could choose something else. Chapter 5. The Unexpected Partnership. Dina stood in the center of the fighting ring, wrapped in Vincent's cloak, the mark on her forehead glowing softly in the rain. 5,000 people waited in silence for her judgment. The white lichen had returned. The rightful heir stood revealed. She could burn everything down, and no one could stop her. She looked at Vincent, still kneeling in the mud, his crown lying forgotten at her feet. He'd surrendered everything, and now he waited to see if that surrender would cost him his life. Stand up, Alpha King. Vincent rose slowly, uncertainty written across his face. He'd given up his crown, acknowledged her claim, knelt before her in front of his entire kingdom. He had no idea what came next. Dina turned to face the crowd, her voice carrying across the arena despite her exhaustion. My family was murdered for a throne. I could take it back with blood. She paused, and the crowd tensed, waiting for the axe to fall. The white lichen's power gives me that right. Whispers rippled through the stands. Nobles who'd conspired with King Edmund went pale, already seeing their executions. But what would that make me? Dina continued. Another tyrant ruling through fear? Another murderer adding bodies to the pile? She turned back to Vincent, gray eyes meeting gold. You had the power to kill me. Every advantage, your guards, your strength, your authority, your army. You could have ended this before it began. Vincent said nothing, just watched her with those unreadable golden eyes. Instead you knelt. Deanna said, you chose honor over power. You chose truth over lies. You chose justice over the crown your father left you. She took a step toward him, the cloak dragging in the mud. The kingdom doesn't need another conqueror. It doesn't need more blood, more lies, more families destroyed. It needs leaders who will heal what's broken. Dina extended her hand toward Vincent, her voice clear and strong. Alpha King Vincent Watts, I offer you a partnership. Not queen and subject, not conqueror and conquered. Partners, equals. The crowd gasped, murmurs rippling through the arena like wind through grass. Rule beside me, Deanna continued. Teach me what I don't know, law, diplomacy, leadership. Let me help you rebuild what our fathers destroyed. Together, we can make Thornwick into something better than it's ever been. Vincent stared at her extended hand as if it were something from a dream. You would trust me? His voice was barely above a whisper. After everything my family did to yours? You knelt when you could have struck, Dina said simply. You chose justice when you could have chosen power. That's trust enough to start. For a long moment, Vincent just looked at her. This girl who'd been sentenced to die, who'd survived the impossible, who'd become a legend, and who was now offering him redemption instead of revenge. He reached out and took her hand. The crowd erupted. Not the bloodthirsty roar from before, but something different, something that sounded like hope. Common wolves were cheering, tears streaming down their faces. Even some of the nobles, those who hadn't been part of the conspiracy, began to clap, seeing the wisdom in what was being offered. Wilson Williamson's voice rose above the noise. A new beginning. The kingdom united under Moon-Blessed and Watts both. The chant changed, evolving. Long live the king, long live the queen, long live Thornwick. But not everyone was celebrating. A group of nobles in the gallery, perhaps 20 of them, stood frozen, their faces twisted with rage and fear. These were the men who'd grown rich on Thorn lands, who'd supported King Edmund's coup, who'd built their fortunes on genocide. One of them, Lord Brennan, a heavy-set man with a face like a bulldog, stepped forward, his voice cutting through the celebration. This is madness. The king has been bewitched by that creature. Guards, seize her. Protect your king. But the guards didn't move. They looked at Vincent, waiting for his command. Vincent's voice was cold as ice. Lord Brennan, you will address Princess Diana with respect, or you will be removed from this arena. Respect? Brennan spat. For a wolfless slave who murdered a noble? For a beast that threatens our very way of life? Your Majesty, I beg you to see reason. This thing cannot be allowed to. Captain Wilson, Vincent interrupted, his golden eyes never leaving Brennan's face. Arrest Lord Brennan, and all nobles who benefited from the Thornlands seizure. They will stand trial for conspiracy to commit genocide. Wilson stood immediately, a grim smile crossing his face. With pleasure, Your Majesty. Guards moved into the gallery. The conspirator nobles tried to flee, but there was nowhere to go. Within minutes, 20 men were in chains, their protests and threats falling on deaf ears. You can't do this, Brennan screamed as guards dragged him away. I am a lord of Thornwick. I have rights. I demand. You have the right to a fair trial, Diana said, her voice cutting through his protests. Which is more than you gave my family. Which is more than you gave me 3 days ago. Brennan's face went purple with rage, but the guards hauled him away before he could respond. As the last of the conspirators were removed, Vincent turned to address the crowd. People of Thornwick, today you witnessed history. The White Lichen has returned. The moon-blessed bloodline lives. The truth my father tried to bury has been revealed. He paused, letting the words sink in. My father built our prosperity on stolen blood. He murdered innocent people to take power, then lied about it for 20 years. That ends now. No more lies. No more corruption. No more ruling through fear. Diana stepped forward, and the crowd fell even quieter, straining to hear. I stand before you not as a conqueror, but as someone who has lived as you have. I've been powerless, voiceless, invisible. I've scrubbed floors and gone hungry and been beaten for daring to speak. Her voice grew stronger. I know what it's like to suffer under unjust laws. I know what it's like to watch the powerful destroy the weak, because they can. And I swear to you, on the moon goddess herself, on the memory of my family that ends today, Vincent spoke again. No more slaves. No more false accusations, Diana added. No more families torn apart for power. No more choosing between honor and survival. They spoke together, their voices blending. We begin a new era, together. A kingdom built on truth, justice, and the belief that every life has value. This is our promise to you. The crowd erupted in approval, the sound rolling across the square like thunder. Not everyone was convinced Diana could see the skeptical faces, the nobles who looked angry or afraid, but most of the people cheering were genuine. Hope, fragile and new, was spreading through the capital. Thomas Osborne, Vincent's elderly advisor, approached cautiously. He bowed to both Vincent and Diana, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by the watching crowd. Your Majesties, he said carefully, testing the plural title. The palace should be prepared for your arrival, and Princess Diana will need everything. Clothing, chambers, attendants, tutors, and medical attention, Vincent interrupted, looking at Diana with concern. She's been tortured for 3 days and fought 3 battles. She needs healers immediately. Diana wanted to protest that she was fine, but the moment Vincent mentioned it, exhaustion crashed over her like a physical weight. Her legs buckled, and only Vincent's quick reflexes kept her from falling. I've got you, he said quietly, lifting her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. Wilson, clear a path to the royal carriage. Thomas, send riders ahead. I want the best healers waiting at the palace. Your Majesty, Diana protested weakly. I can walk. You don't need to. You just transformed into a white lichen, fought off my best warriors, and changed the fate of a kingdom, Vincent said, a hint of amusement in his voice. You're allowed to rest now. As Vincent carried her toward the waiting carriage, the crowd parted like water. People reached out, not to attack, but to touch the hem of Vincent's cloak that covered her, to brush their fingers against her arm. It was reverent, almost worshipful. Moon-blessed, they whispered. The white lichen. She's real. The prophecy is real. Eula pushed through the crowd, her face still tear-streaked. My lady, princess, you saved me and I couldn't. Dina reached out from Vincent's arms and took Eula's hand. You're safe now, that's all that matters. Come to the palace tomorrow. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Eula nodded, unable to speak through her tears. The royal carriage was massive, midnight blue with silver trim, pulled by 6 white horses. Vincent climbed in carefully, still holding Dina, and settled her on the cushioned bench. Wilson and Tomas climbed in after them. As the carriage began to move, Deanna looked out the window at the fighting ring one last time. The place that was supposed to be her grave. The place where she'd died and been reborn. What happens to that place? She asked quietly. Vincent followed her gaze. What would you like to happen to it? Dina was quiet for a moment. Tear it down. Every stone. Build something beautiful there. A garden, maybe. A place to remember everyone who died unjustly. My family. The warriors who fell. Everyone who suffered under the old ways. Consider it done, Vincent said. The carriage rolled through the streets of the capital, and everywhere people came out of their homes to watch. Some cheered. Some just stared in wonder. Children pointed at the royal crest on the carriage, asking their parents if it was true, if the white lichen was really inside. They're going to expect so much from us, Deanna said, watching the faces blur past. From me. I don't know if I can be what they need. You already are, Vincent replied. You survived the impossible. You chose mercy when you had every right to choose vengeance. You offered partnership instead of conquest. Those aren't the actions of someone who doesn't know how to lead. I don't even know how to be a person, Deanna admitted quietly. I've been property my whole life. I don't know how to make decisions for myself, let alone for a kingdom. Wilson, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Your mother was the same way at first. Lady Helena was barely 18 when she took her seat on the Moon-Blessed Council. I remember her saying she felt like an imposter. Like everyone would realize she didn't belong. Deanna looked at him sharply. You knew my mother? I was her guard, Wilson said, fresh tears welling in his eyes. Before that night. She was brilliant, princess. Kind but fierce. She could read a person's character in minutes. She fought for the powerless, for the voiceless. She made King Edmund nervous because she couldn't be bought or intimidated. That's why he killed her, Vincent said quietly. Wilson nodded. Your father, Lord Julian, was much the same. They were beloved by the common people. The nobles feared them because they kept challenging the old ways, the corruption. If they had lived... He trailed off, unable to finish. If they had lived, Thornwick would be a very different place. Deanna finished for him. She was quiet for a moment. Tell me about them. Everything you remember. I want to know who they were. For the rest of the carriage ride, Wilson told stories. How Helena loved to ride at dawn, racing through the forests with abandon. How Julian had a terrible singing voice but sang anyway, making his wife laugh. How they'd met at a summer festival and fallen in love so quickly it scandalized the court. How they danced at every celebration, lost in their own world. Deanna listened, tears streaming down her face, learning about the parents she'd never known, building a picture of the people whose blood ran in her veins. By the time the carriage reached the palace, she'd fallen asleep, exhausted beyond measure, Vincent's cloak wrapped around her like a cocoon. Vincent looked down at her sleeping face and felt something shift in his chest. This girl, this woman, had every reason to hate him, to destroy everything he held dear. Instead, she'd offered partnership, redemption. She's going to change everything, Tomas said softly, following Vincent's gaze. She already has, Vincent replied. The palace loomed before them. All towers and spires and centuries of history. A place built by kings and queens. By power and politics and blood. Now it would house two rulers. Two bloodlines that should have been enemies. Two people who would either save the kingdom or tear it apart trying. Chapter 5. The Unexpected Partnership. Deanna stood in the center of the fighting ring, wrapped in Vincent's cloak, the mark on her forehead glowing softly in the rain. 5,000 people waited in silence for her judgment. The white lichen had returned. The rightful heir stood revealed. She could burn everything down. and no one could stop her. She looked at Vincent, still kneeling in the mud, his crown lying forgotten at her feet. He'd surrendered everything, and now he waited to see if that surrender would cost him his life. "Stand up, Alpha King." Vincent rose slowly, uncertainty written across his face. He'd given up his crown, acknowledged her claim, knelt before her in front of his entire kingdom. He had no idea what came next. Deanna turned to face the crowd, her voice carrying across the arena despite her exhaustion. "My family was murdered for a throne. I could take it back with blood." She paused, and the crowd tensed, waiting for the axe to fall. "The White Lycan's power gives me that right." Whispers rippled through the stands. Nobles who'd conspired with King Edmund went pale, already seeing their executions. "But what would that make me?" Deanna continued. "Another tyrant ruling through fear? Another murderer adding bodies to the pile?" She turned back to Vincent, gray eyes meeting gold. "You had the power to kill me. Every advantage, your guards, your strength, your authority, your army. You could have ended this before it began." Vincent said nothing, just watched her with those unreadable golden eyes. "Instead, you knelt," Deanna said. "You chose honor over power. You chose truth over lies. You chose justice over the crown your father left you." She took a step toward him, the cloak dragging in the mud. "The kingdom doesn't need another conqueror. It doesn't need more blood, more lies, more families destroyed. It needs leaders who will heal what's broken." Deanna extended her hand toward Vincent, her voice clear and strong. "Alpha King Vincent Watts, I offer you a partnership, not queen and subject, not conqueror and conquered, partners, equals." The crowd gasped, murmurs rippling through the arena like wind through grass. "Rule beside me," Deanna continued. "Teach me what I don't know, law, diplomacy, leadership. Let me help you rebuild what our fathers destroyed. Together, we can make Thornwick into something better than it's ever been." Vincent stared at her extended hand as if it were something from a dream. "You would trust me?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "After everything my family did to yours?" "You knelt when you could have struck," Deanna said simply. "You chose justice when you could have chosen power. That's trust enough to start." For a long moment, Vincent just looked at her. This girl who'd been sentenced to die, who'd survived the impossible, who'd become a legend, and who was now offering him redemption instead of revenge. He reached out and took her hand. The crowd erupted. Not the bloodthirsty roar from before, but something different, something that sounded like hope. Common wolves were cheering, tears streaming down their faces. Even some of the nobles, those who hadn't been part of the conspiracy, began to clap, seeing the wisdom in what was being offered. Wilson Williamson's voice rose above the noise. "A new beginning. The kingdom united under Moon Blessed and Watts both." The chant changed, evolving. "Long live the king. Long live the queen. Long live Thornwick." But not everyone was celebrating. A group of nobles in the gallery, perhaps 20 of them, stood frozen, their faces twisted with rage and fear. These were the men who'd grown rich on Thornlands, who'd supported King Edmund's coup, who'd built their fortunes on genocide. One of them, Lord Brennan, a heavy-set man with a face like a bulldog, stepped forward, his voice cutting through the celebration. "This is madness. The king has been bewitched by that creature. Guards, seize her, protect your king." But the guards didn't move. They looked at Vincent, waiting for his command. Vincent's voice was cold as ice. "Lord Brennan, you will address Princess Dina with respect, or you will be removed from this arena." "Respect?" Brennan spat. "For a wolfless slave who murdered a noble? For a beast that threatens our very way of life? Your Majesty, I beg you to see reason. This thing cannot be allowed to." "Captain Wilson," Vincent interrupted, his golden eyes never leaving Brennan's face. "Arrest Lord Brennan and all nobles who benefited from the Thornland seizure. They will stand trial for conspiracy to commit genocide." Wilson stood immediately, a grim smile crossing his face. "With pleasure, Your Majesty." Guards moved into the gallery. The conspirator nobles tried to flee, but there was nowhere to go. Within minutes, 20 men were in chains, their protests and threats falling on deaf ears. "You can't do this," Brennan screamed as guards dragged him away. "I am a lord of Thornwick. I have rights. I demand. You have the right to a fair trial, Deanna said, her voice cutting through his protests. Which is more than you gave my family. Which is more than you gave me 3 days ago. Brennan's face went purple with rage, but the guards hauled him away before he could respond. As the last of the conspirators were removed, Vincent turned to address the crowd. People of Thornwick, today you witnessed history. The White Lichen has returned. The moon-blessed bloodline lives. The truth my father tried to bury has been revealed. He paused, letting the words sink in. My father built our prosperity on stolen blood. He murdered innocent people to take power, then lied about it for 20 years. That ends now. No more lies. No more corruption. No more ruling through fear. Deanna stepped forward, and the crowd fell even quieter, straining to hear. I stand before you, not as a conqueror, but as someone who has lived as you have. I've been powerless, voiceless, invisible. I've scrubbed floors and gone hungry and been beaten for daring to speak. Her voice grew stronger. I know what it's like to suffer under unjust laws. I know what it's like to watch the powerful destroy the weak because they can. And I swear to you, on the moon goddess herself, on the memory of my family that ends today. Vincent spoke again. No more slaves. No more false accusations. Deanna added. No more families torn apart for power. No more choosing between honor and survival. They spoke together, their voices blending. We begin a new era. Together. A kingdom built on truth, justice, and the belief that every life has value. This is our promise to you. The crowd erupted in approval, the sound rolling across the square like thunder. Not everyone was convinced. Deanna could see the skeptical faces, the nobles who looked angry or afraid, but most of the people cheering were genuine. Hope, fragile and new, was spreading through the capital. Tomas Osborne, Vincent's elderly advisor, approached cautiously. He bowed to both Vincent and Deanna, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by the watching crowd. Your Majesties, he said carefully, testing the plural title. The palace should be prepared for your arrival, and Princess Deanna will need everything: clothing, chambers, attendants, tutors, and medical attention. Vincent interrupted, looking at Deanna with concern. She's been tortured for 3 days and fought 3 battles. She needs healers immediately. Deanna wanted to protest that she was fine, but the moment Vincent mentioned it, exhaustion crashed over her like a physical weight. Her legs buckled, and only Vincent's quick reflexes kept her from falling. I've got you, he said quietly, lifting her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. Wilson, clear a path to the royal carriage. Tomas, send riders ahead. I want the best healers waiting at the palace. Your Majesty, Deanna protested weakly. I can walk. You don't need to. You just transformed into a white lichen, fought off my best warriors, and changed the fate of a kingdom, Vincent said, a hint of amusement in his voice. You're allowed to rest now. As Vincent carried her toward the waiting carriage, the crowd parted like water. People reached out, not to attack, but to touch the hem of Vincent's cloak that covered her, to brush their fingers against her arm. It was reverent, almost worshipful. Moon blessed, they whispered. The white lichen. She's real. The prophecy is real. Eula pushed through the crowd, her face still tear-streaked. My lady. Princess. You saved me and I couldn't. Deanna reached out from Vincent's arms and took Eula's hand. You're safe now. That's all that matters. Come to the palace tomorrow. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Eula nodded, unable to speak through her tears. The royal carriage was massive, midnight blue with silver trim, pulled by 6 white horses. Vincent climbed in carefully, still holding Deanna, and settled her on the cushioned bench. Wilson and Tomas climbed in after them. As the carriage began to move, Deanna looked out the window at the fighting ring one last time. The place that was supposed to be her grave. The place where she'd died and been reborn. What happens to that place? She asked quietly. Vincent followed her gaze. What would you like to happen to it? Deanna was quiet for a moment. Tear it down. Every stone. Build something beautiful there. A garden, maybe. A place to remember everyone who died unjustly. My family. The warriors who fell. Everyone who suffered under the old ways. Consider it done, Vincent said. The carriage rolled through the streets of the capital, and everywhere people came out of their homes to watch. Some cheered. Some just stared in wonder. Children pointed at the royal crest on the carriage, asking their parents if it was true, if the white lichen was really inside. They're going to expect so much from us, Dina said, watching the faces blur past. For me, I don't know if I can be what they need. You already are, Vincent replied. You survived the impossible. You chose mercy when you had every right to choose vengeance. You offered partnership instead of conquest. Those aren't the actions of someone who doesn't know how to lead. I don't even know how to be a person, Dina admitted quietly. I've been property my whole life. I don't know how to make decisions for myself, let alone for a kingdom. Wilson, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Your mother was the same way at first. Lady Helena was barely 18 when she took her seat on the Moon-Blessed Council. I remember her saying she felt like an imposter, like everyone would realize she didn't belong. Deanna looked at him sharply. You knew my mother? I was her guard, Wilson said, fresh tears welling in his eyes. Before that night. She was brilliant, princess, kind but fierce. She could read a person's character in minutes. She fought for the powerless, for the voiceless. She made King Edmund nervous because she couldn't be bought or intimidated. That's why he killed her, Vincent said quietly. Wilson nodded. Your father, Lord Julian, was much the same. They were beloved by the common people. The nobles feared them because they kept challenging the old ways, the corruption. If they had lived. He trailed off, unable to finish. If they had lived, Thornwick would be a very different place. Deanna finished for him. She was quiet for a moment. Tell me about them. Everything you remember. I want to know who they were. For the rest of the carriage ride, Wilson told stories. How Helena loved to ride at dawn, racing through the forests with abandon. How Julian had a terrible singing voice but sang anyway, making his wife laugh. How they'd met at a summer festival and fallen in love so quickly it scandalized the court. How they'd danced at every celebration, lost in their own world. Dina listened, tears streaming down her face, learning about the parents she'd never known, building a picture of the people whose blood ran in her veins. By the time the carriage reached the palace, she'd fallen asleep, exhausted beyond measure, Vincent's cloak wrapped around her like a cocoon. Vincent looked down at her sleeping face and felt something shift in his chest. This girl, this woman had every reason to hate him, to destroy everything he held dear. Instead, she'd offered partnership, redemption. She's going to change everything, Tomas said softly, following Vincent's gaze. She already has, Vincent replied. The palace loomed before them, all towers and spires and centuries of history. A place built by kings and queens. By power and politics and blood. Now it would house two rulers. Two bloodlines that should have been enemies. Two people who would either save the kingdom or tear it apart trying. Chapter 6. The Palace of Ghosts. The palace healers worked through the night. Deanna woke in a bed so soft it felt like floating on clouds. For a moment, she panicked luxury like this was forbidden to slaves, and someone would beat her for daring to touch it. Then memory crashed back. The fighting ring, the transformation, the crown in the mud. She sat up carefully, wincing at the protest from her ribs. Bandages wrapped her torso, white and clean and professionally done. She was wearing a silk nightgown, pale blue and embroidered with silver thread. Her hair had been washed, the blood and dirt scrubbed away. The room around her was enormous, vaulted ceilings painted with murals of the moon and stars, windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, currently covered with heavy curtains. Furniture carved from dark wood, polished to a shine. A fireplace large enough to stand in, flames crackling warmly. A room fit for a princess. The door opened softly, and a young woman entered carrying a tray. She couldn't have been more than 20, with kind eyes and nervous hands. Princess, you're awake. I'm Sammy Lacey, assigned as your lady's maid. I brought breakfast, though it's nearly noon now. The healer said you needed rest. So we didn't wake you. Dina stared at the girl at Sammy and felt panic rising. I don't need a maid. I can dress myself. I can. Of course you can, Sammy said gently, setting the tray on a nearby table. But you don't have to anymore. That's the difference. The kindness in her voice made Deanna's throat tight. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The healers mended your ribs as much as they could, Sammy continued, fussing with the curtains, letting in pale afternoon light. They said you had 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, extensive bruising, and lash marks from. She trailed off, her face going pale. From torture. I'm so sorry, Princess. What they did to you was... It's over, Dina said quietly. What matters is what happens next. Sammy nodded, blinking away tears. His Majesty King Vincent has requested your presence for a private meeting when you're ready. No rush, he said, but he thought you'd want to discuss everything. Where are my clothes? Dina asked, looking around. The rags you were wearing were burned, Sammy said apologetically. But we've had seamstresses working all night. You have an entire wardrobe now, though nothing is properly fitted yet. We'll need measurements for... Just something simple, Dina interrupted. Please. I don't need fancy dresses. Just something I can move in. Sammy smiled. I think we can arrange that. 20 minutes later, Dina stood in front of a full-length mirror, barely recognizing herself. She wore a simple tunic, and trousers fine quality but practical, in deep forest green with silver trim. Her hair had been braided back from her face. The mark on her forehead was fully visible now, the crescent moon and stars a permanent golden shimmer against her skin. She looked like someone important. It terrified her. You look beautiful, Princess, Sammy said softly. I look like an imposter, Dina replied. You look like who you've always been, Sammy corrected. You just didn't know it. A knock at the door interrupted them. Wilson entered, now wearing fresh armor, his face clean of blood and mud but still carrying the weight of guilt in his eyes. Princess, he said, bowing deeply, His Majesty is ready when you are. I'm to escort you to his private study. Dina nodded and followed him out into the corridor. The palace was overwhelming, hallways that seemed to stretch forever, lined with portraits of kings and queens from centuries past. Servants in crisp uniforms bowed as she passed. Guards snapped to attention. Every surface gleamed with wealth and power. This was supposed to be her birthright, but it felt as foreign as the moon. Your chambers are in the East Wing, Wilson explained as they walked. The royal family traditionally lives in the West Wing, but His Majesty thought you'd want some distance. For now. That was thoughtful of him, Deanna said. He wants this partnership to work, Wilson replied. We all do. The kingdom needs it. They walked in silence for a moment before Deanna spoke again. Why did you do it? 20 years ago. Why did you follow those orders? Wilson's jaw tightened. Because I was a soldier. Because I believed my king was just. Because I was too much of a coward to question orders, even when they felt wrong. And now? Now I know that following unjust orders doesn't absolve you of the crime. Wilson said. Now I know that courage isn't just fighting in battle. Sometimes it's saying no when everyone around you is saying yes. They reached a set of ornate double doors. Wilson knocked once, then pushed them open. Vincent's private study was smaller than Deanna expected, still large by any normal standard, but intimate compared to the throne room or grand halls. Bookshelves lined every wall, filled with leather-bound volumes. A massive desk sat near the windows, covered with maps and documents. A seating area with comfortable chairs surrounded a smaller fireplace. Vincent stood by the window, still wearing the same clothes from the arena, now dried but stained with mud and blood. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his golden eyes, but he straightened when Deanna entered. Princess, he said, then caught himself. Or would you prefer just Deanna? I realize we never actually discussed. Dina is fine, she said quickly. I'm still getting used to Princess. Vincent smiled slightly. I'm still getting used to being king, so we're in the same position. He gestured to the chairs. Please, sit. We have a lot to discuss. Wilson bowed and left, closing the doors behind him. Suddenly, Deanna was alone with the man who'd knelt before her in the mud, the man whose father had murdered her family, the man who'd just offered to share his throne. She sat carefully, and Vincent took the chair across from her. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I got thrown across a fighting ring and transformed into a mythical wolf," Deanna said. "So, not great, but alive." Vincent's smile widened slightly. "Fair enough." He poured 2 glasses of water from a pitcher on the side table and handed her one. "I wanted to talk before we face the council tomorrow. They're going to have opinions about everything. They're going to hate me," Deanna said flatly. "Some of them will," Vincent admitted. "But others will see what I see. An opportunity to make things right. To build something better than what came before." "What do you see when you look at me?" Deanna asked suddenly. "Really?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering. "I see someone who survived things that should have broken them. Someone who chose mercy when they had every right to choose revenge. Someone who's terrified but trying not to show it." Deanna blinked, surprised by his honesty. "I also see someone who has no idea how powerful they actually are," Vincent continued. "Not just the white lichen, though that's substantial, but the power to inspire people. To make them believe things can change. That's rarer than any magic." "I don't feel powerful," Deanna admitted. "I feel like I'm drowning and everyone's expecting me to swim." "Then we'll drown together," Vincent said. "That's what partnership means." Deanna studied him carefully. "Why did you really kneel? Was it just your grandmother's letter? Or was there more?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, staring into his glass. "I've spent 6 months trying to be the king my father was. Strong, decisive, unquestioning. But every decision felt wrong. Every law I upheld felt unjust. Every noble I met seemed more interested in power than people." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "When I saw you in that ring, broken, beaten, but still standing, I saw what real strength looks like. And when you transformed, when the moon goddess herself marked you as the rightful heir, I realized I'd been given a choice my father never had." "What choice?" "To do the right thing, even if it cost me everything," Vincent said simply. "My crown, my power, my life. You could have taken it all. Instead, you offered partnership. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of ruler you'll be." "I don't know anything about ruling," Deanna said. "I barely know how to read." "Then we start there," Vincent replied. He stood and walked to his desk, returning with a stack of books. History, law, diplomacy, military strategy. "We'll work through them together. I'll teach you what I know, and you'll teach me what you know." "What could I possibly teach you?" "How to see the kingdom from the bottom up," Vincent said. "I've lived my whole life in palaces and war rooms. You've lived in kitchens and slave quarters. You know what the common people need because you've been one of them. That perspective is invaluable." Deanna looked at the books, feeling overwhelmed. "This is going to take months, years." "We have time," Vincent said. "The council will want immediate decisions, but they can wait. Getting this partnership right is more important than moving fast." A knock at the door interrupted them. Tomas entered without waiting for permission, his face grave. "Your Majesties, forgive the interruption, but there's been a development. Lord Caldwell has demanded an audience. He claims he has information about Princess Deanna's mother about what really happened the night of the raid." Vincent and Deanna exchanged glances. "He's lying," Deanna said. "He just wants leverage." "Probably," Vincent agreed. "But we should hear him out. If there's even a chance he knows something about your family, then we go together," Deanna finished. Tomas looked uncomfortable. "Your Majesties, Lord Caldwell is being held in the dungeon cells. They're not appropriate for a princess to." "I spent 3 days being tortured in cells just like them," Deanna interrupted. "I can handle it." Vincent stood. "Take us to him." The dungeons beneath the palace were exactly as Deanna remembered from her nightmares, cold, dark, smelling of mold and fear. But this time, she walked through them as a princess, not a prisoner. Lord Caldwell occupied a cell in the deepest level. He looked smaller somehow, without his fine clothes and surrounded by luxury. Just a frightened old man facing justice for crimes he thought he'd gotten away with. He stood when they approached, gripping the bars. Your Majesty, Princess, thank the moon goddess. I've been waiting to explain. You have 5 minutes, Vincent said coldly. Speak. Caldwell's eyes darted between them, calculating. I know where your mother's body is buried, Princess. The real location, not the fake memorial in the public cemetery. And I know what your father was working on before he died, research that King Edmund was desperate to hide. Information that could change everything. Deanna's heart hammered. You're lying. Am I? Caldwell smiled, showing teeth. Lady Helena kept journals. Detailed records of King Edmund's crimes, his plans, his conspiracies. Your father hid them before the raid. I know where. How? Vincent demanded. Because I was Edmund's spy master, Caldwell said. I tracked every move the Thorns made. I just couldn't find where Julian hid the evidence before we killed him. Deanna's hands clenched into fists. And you'll tell us this information in exchange for what? Your freedom? Exile instead of execution, Caldwell said. And a guarantee of safety for my remaining family. My son is dead because of you, girl. But I have a daughter, grandchildren. I want them protected. Vincent looked at Deanna. It's your choice. He helped murder your family. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. Deanna stared at Caldwell, this man who'd orchestrated so much suffering. Part of her wanted to refuse, to let him take his secrets to the grave. But the thought of her mother's journals, of knowing her parents through their own words instead of other people's memories. Tell us where the journals are first, she said. Then we'll discuss terms. Caldwell's smile widened. Smart girl. Just like your mother. He leaned closer to the bars. There's a chapel on the old Thorn estate, or what's left of it. The ruins are still there, forbidden ground now. Beneath the altar, there's a hidden chamber. That's where Julian hid everything. And my mother's grave? Deanna asked, her voice breaking slightly. Caldwell's expression softened, just for a moment. In the family cemetery behind the chapel. Helena insisted on being buried near her ancestors. Edmund had her body moved there in secret. He was superstitious, afraid her spirit would haunt him if she wasn't properly laid to rest. Deanna turned away, tears streaming down her face. Vincent's hand found her shoulder, steady and warm. We'll go tomorrow, he said quietly. Together. We'll bring your mother home. Deanna nodded, unable to speak. Vincent turned back to Caldwell. You'll have exile instead of execution. But you leave Thornwick forever, and your family's lands are forfeit. If you ever return, the sentence will be carried out immediately. Agreed, Caldwell said quickly. Thank you, Your Majesty. Your Highness. I know it doesn't change what I did. But, you're right. Deanna interrupted, finding her voice. It doesn't change anything. My family is still dead. Eula was still terrorized. I was still tortured and nearly executed. But I won't become a murderer to punish murderers. That's the only mercy you're getting from me. They left him in his cell and climbed back up to the palace proper. Deanna felt hollow, scraped out by emotion. Are you all right? Vincent asked when they reached the main floor. No, Deanna said honestly. But I will be. Eventually. We don't have to go tomorrow if you're not ready. I need to. Deanna interrupted. I need to see where they lived. Where they died. I need to know them. Even if it hurts. Vincent nodded. Then I'll be with you. Whatever you need. They stood in the hallway, two rulers bound by tragedy and hope, trying to build something new from the ashes of the old. Outside, the twin moons rose over Thornwick, their silver light washing through the palace windows. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more pain, more impossible choices. But tonight, for the first time in her life, Deanna went to sleep in a bed that was hers, in a room where no one could hurt her, in a palace where she was not property, but a princess. It was a start. Chapter 7. The Ruins of Home. Dawn broke cold and gray over Thornwick. Deanna stood in her chambers, dressed in riding clothes that Sammy had laid out: dark leather pants, a warm tunic, and a cloak lined with fur. The mark on her forehead glowed softly in the morning light, a constant reminder of what she'd become. She hadn't slept well. Dreams of fire and screaming had plagued her half memory, half imagination. Her parents dying while she, a baby, cried helplessly somewhere in the chaos. Wilson's face, younger then, cutting down her father, the manor burning. A knock at the door pulled her from the dark thoughts. "Come in." Vincent entered, also dressed for riding. He looked as tired as she felt. "The horses are ready. I've arranged for a small escort, Wilson, and 4 guards. The Thorn estate is about 2 hours north of the capital. Will there be anything left?" Deanna asked quietly. "After 20 years? The ruins are still there," Vincent said. "My father forbade anyone from rebuilding on that land. He declared it cursed, told people that lingering there would bring misfortune. It was just another way to erase your family from memory." Deanna's jaw tightened. "Then let's go bring them back." They rode out through the palace gates as the sun climbed higher. Common folk were already gathering in the streets, word having spread that the princess and king were traveling together. People lined the road, some cheering, some just watching in silent awe. "Moon-blessed," a woman called out, falling to her knees. "Thank you for returning to us." Dina felt uncomfortable with the reverence, but she nodded acknowledgement as they passed. These people were pinning their hopes on her, expecting miracles. She just hoped she wouldn't disappoint them. The city gradually gave way to countryside, rolling hills covered in late autumn grass, forests bare of leaves, streams running cold and clear. It was beautiful in a stark way. Dina had never traveled beyond the capital before. She'd spent her entire life within the walls of House Caldwell's estate. "Your parents used to ride these roads every week," Wilson said, drawing his horse alongside hers. He'd been quiet since they left, lost in his own memories. Helena loved visiting the villages. She'd bring food, medicine, whatever was needed. Your father would settle disputes, help with harvests. They were beloved out here. "What were they like?" Deanna asked. "Really like, not just the stories people tell about dead heroes." Wilson smiled, sad and genuine. Helena was fierce. She had a temper when roused, especially when she saw injustice. I once watched her tear into a noble twice her size for beating a servant. The man practically wet himself. He chuckled at the memory. But she was also kind. She'd sit with sick children for hours, singing to them. She made everyone around her feel seen. "And my father?" "Julian was the steady one," Wilson continued. "Thoughtful, patient. He could talk his way out of almost anything or into anything, depending on the situation. He loved your mother desperately. You could see it in the way he looked at her, like she hung the moons themselves." Dina blinked back tears. "They sound perfect." "They weren't," Wilson said gently. "Helena could be stubborn to the point of recklessness. Julian sometimes let his desire for peace keep him from acting quickly enough. They argued, made mistakes, struggled like everyone else. But they loved each other. And they loved you. They didn't even get to watch me grow up," Deanna whispered. "No," Wilson agreed. "And that's the real tragedy. Not just that they died, but all the life that was stolen from them. From you." They rode in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. After 2 hours, they crested a hill and Deanna's breath caught. Below them lay the ruins. The Thorn Manor had been grand once she could see that even in its destroyed state. Stone walls still stood in places, reaching toward the sky like broken fingers. The roof was gone, burned away 2 decades ago. Windows gaped empty, glass long since shattered. Ivy and weeds had reclaimed much of it, nature slowly consuming what fire had started. Beyond the manor, she could see the remains of other buildings, stables, a guardhouse, servants' quarters, all in similar states of decay. And in the distance, partially hidden by overgrown trees, a small stone chapel. "That's where the journals are?" Deanna asked, pointing. "According to Caldwell," Vincent confirmed. He looked at her carefully. "We don't have to do this today. If you need more time." "I've had 22 years," Dina interrupted. "I'm ready." They guided their horses down the hill toward the ruins. As they got closer, Dina felt something strange, a pull, almost magnetic, drawing her toward the destroyed manor. The mark on her forehead began to glow brighter. "Do you feel that?" Vincent asked, his own wolf clearly responding to whatever power lingered here. Yes, Deanna breathed. It's like the land itself remembers. They dismounted near what had once been the main entrance. The grand doors were long gone, leaving only a dark archway into the ruined interior. Deanna stepped inside. The entry hall was open to the sky now. The ceiling collapsed years ago. Charred beams lay scattered across the floor, covered in moss and decay. But she could imagine how it had looked once, tapestries on the walls, a chandelier overhead, polished marble beneath her feet. This had been her home. For 1 year of her life, this place had held her family, her safety, her future. Then it had all burned. The nursery was on the second floor, Wilson said quietly, pointing to a ruined staircase. East wing, overlooking the gardens. Your mother spent hours there, preparing for your arrival. She painted the walls herself. A night sky full of stars. Deanna walked carefully through the debris, following Wilson's directions. The stairs were too unstable to climb, but she could see the remains of the second floor from below. A child's room, destroyed. A life that never had the chance to be lived. Where did they die? She asked, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. Wilson's expression crumbled. Helena died here, in the entry hall. She was defending the stairs, trying to keep us from reaching you. She killed 3 guards before. He couldn't finish. And my father? The study, on the first floor. He was protecting the servants' escape route. He took down 5 of us before he fell. Vincent, who had been standing back to give them space, spoke up. They were warriors, both of them. They died protecting what they loved. Deanna nodded, unable to speak. She touched the scorched wall, feeling the rough stone beneath her fingers. Her parents' blood had soaked this ground. Their last moments had been spent in terror and violence, fighting desperately to save their baby daughter, and she'd never known them. Show me the chapel, she said finally. I want to find those journals. They made their way through the overgrown grounds toward the small stone chapel. It had survived the fire, being separate from the main manor. The roof was intact, though the door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the air was cold and stale. Dust covered everything simple: wooden pews, a small altar at the front, narrow windows that let in fingers of gray light. It smelled of abandonment and time, Caldwell said beneath the altar. Vincent reminded them. They approached the altar carefully. It was stone, carved with images of the moon and wolves in various phases. Ancient, probably as old as the bloodline itself. Wilson and 2 guards put their shoulders against it, pushing. The altar groaned, resisting at first, then slowly slid aside with a grinding sound. Beneath it, a narrow stone staircase descended into darkness. I'll go first, Wilson said, drawing his sword. No, Deanna said firmly. This is my family's legacy. I go first. Before anyone could argue, she started down the stairs. The descent was short, maybe 15 steps, opening into a small underground chamber. It was circular, maybe 10 feet across, with shelves carved into the stone walls. And on those shelves, books. Dozens of them. Leather-bound journals, carefully preserved in sealed cases. Documents in metal tubes. Maps. Letters. Moon goddess, Vincent breathed, descending behind her. Your father was thorough. Deanna approached the nearest shelf with trembling hands. She lifted one of the journals carefully, breaking the seal that had kept it preserved for 2 decades. The leather was soft, well made. She opened to the first page. The handwriting was elegant, precise. Helena Thorne. Personal journal. Year 1203. Her mother's words. Her mother's thoughts. Right here in her hands. Deanna's vision blurred with tears, but she forced herself to read. Julian tells me I worry too much, but I can't shake this feeling. King Edmund grows more paranoid by the day. The taxes he's imposing on the common villages are brutal. People are starving while he builds monuments to himself. When Julian and I raised concerns at council, Edmund's response was threatening. I'm pregnant. 6 months now. We haven't announced it publicly yet. Something tells me to keep it quiet. Perhaps it's my wolf's instinct, or perhaps just a mother's fear, but I feel in my bones that our child will be born into a dangerous world. I will protect her. Whatever comes, I will protect her. Deanna's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the journal. Vincent steadied her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Take your time," he said quietly. But Deanna couldn't stop reading. She flipped through pages, watching her own story unfold through her mother's eyes. She was born at dawn, Deanna, my perfect, beautiful daughter. She has my eyes and Julian's stubborn chin. I've never felt love like this, so overwhelming it's almost painful. The mark appeared when she was 3 days old. The crescent moon and stars, glowing golden on her forehead. Julian wept when he saw it. Our daughter is moon-blessed. The prophecy is real. But this puts her in even more danger. If Edmund discovers we've had a moon-blessed child, he'll see it as a threat to his rule. We have to be careful. We have to protect her. Deanna turned more pages, faster now, desperate to consume every word. Deanna is walking now, 10 months old and already so independent. She laughs at everything: Julian's terrible singing, my failed attempts at baking, the way the dogs play in the gardens. Her joy is infectious. But Edmund is getting worse. We've discovered he's been selling information to the Shadowlands, our enemies, for 3 generations. He's betraying the kingdom for gold and power. Julian is gathering evidence, building a case to present to the High Council. We have to be careful. Edmund has spies everywhere. The next entry was dated a week before the raid. They know. Someone told Edmund about our evidence. He sent a messenger this morning, a thinly veiled threat wrapped in courteous language. Julian is making preparations. He's hidden all our documents in the chapel crypt, sealed with magic that only our bloodline can break. If something happens to us, if Edmund moves against us, at least the truth will survive. Maybe someday, someone will find it. Maybe someday, justice will be served. I'm writing this in Deanna's nursery while she sleeps. She's curled up with her favorite blanket, peaceful and innocent. She has no idea the storm that's coming. If I don't survive to tell her myself, I want her to know. We loved her. More than kingdoms, more than thrones, more than life itself. Every moment with her was a gift. She was our joy, our hope, our everything. Be strong, my darling girl. Be brave. And know that your parents died fighting for a better world, a world we hoped you would inherit. The entry ended there. The next page was blank. Deanna's sobs echoed through the stone chamber, raw and broken. Vincent wrapped his arms around her as she cried, holding her while grief poured out of her in waves. They knew. She gasped between sobs. They knew they were going to die. They knew, and they still fought. They still tried to protect me. They succeeded, Vincent said gently. You survived. You're here. You're fulfilling everything they hoped for. Wilson descended the stairs, his own face wet with tears. Princess, there's more. Another chamber beyond this one. I think it's the family crypt. Deanna wiped her eyes and nodded. She had to see this through. She had to find her mother. They passed through a narrow archway into a second chamber. This one was larger, older. Stone sarcophagi lined the walls, each carved with names and dates stretching back centuries. Thorn, moon blessed, protectors of the realm. Generation after generation of her family, resting in this place. And at the far end, 2 newer tombs. Simpler than the others, clearly added after the raid. Lord Julian Thorn, beloved husband, father, leader. May the moon goddess guide him home. Lady Helena Thorn, beloved wife, mother, warrior. Her light will never dim. Deanna approached her mother's tomb on shaking legs. Her hands touched the cold stone, tracing the letters of her mother's name. Hello, mother, she whispered. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you. I'm sorry I never got to know you, but I'm here now. And I promise, I swear on everything I am, I'll finish what you started. I'll make Edmund's legacy crumble. I'll build the kingdom you dreamed of. The mark on her forehead blazed with golden light, so bright it illuminated the entire crypt. The air shimmered, and for just a moment, one heartbeat, one breath, Deanna felt something. A presence. Warm and loving and proud. Her mother's spirit, perhaps. Or just her own desperate hope. But it felt real. It felt like forgiveness. Like blessing. like love that transcended death itself. The light faded, and the moment passed. But Deanna felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight she'd been carrying her whole life had finally been lifted. "We'll bring them home," Vincent said. "Both of them. They'll be buried in the royal cemetery with full honors. Your family will be remembered, celebrated, never erased again." Deanna nodded. "And these journals, everything my father documented about Edmund's crimes, we'll make it public. The whole kingdom will know the truth." "It will cause chaos," Wilson warned. "Nobles who supported Edmund, families who benefited from the coup, they'll fight back." "Let them," Deanna said, steel entering her voice. "We have the truth, and truth is more powerful than any army." They spent the next hour carefully removing the journals and documents from the hidden chamber. There were 43 journals in total, plus maps, letters, and detailed records of Edmund's corruption. It was damning evidence, preserved perfectly by her father's foresight and the protective magic of the moon-blessed bloodline. As they prepared to leave, Deanna took one last look at the ruined manor. This place had been her family's home, their sanctuary. Now it was a tomb of memories and ash. But it wouldn't stay that way. "We'll rebuild it," she decided suddenly. Not exactly as it was, but as a monument. A place to honor the moon-blessed line. To teach people about what was lost, and what we're fighting to regain. Vincent smiled. "I think your mother would like that." They rode back toward the capital as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Deanna clutched her mother's first journal against her chest. Precious beyond measure. She had parents now. Not living ones, but real ones. People with hopes and fears and love. People who'd fought for her, died for her. People who'd given her a legacy worth honoring. And she would honor it, every day, with every decision, with every choice. The white lichen had returned. The moon-blessed bloodline lived again, and Thornwick would never be the same. Chapter 8. The Council of Wolves. The High Council convened at dawn the next morning in the Great Hall, a cavernous room with vaulted ceilings and walls lined with the banners of Thornwick's noble houses. 43 council members sat in a semicircle of carved wooden chairs, representing every major family and territory in the kingdom. Deanna stood beside Vincent at the head of the hall, very aware that every eye in the room was fixed on her. The mark on her forehead glowed softly, impossible to hide or ignore. She wore formal attire, now a gown of deep midnight blue with silver embroidery, the colors of both bloodlines combined. Sammy had braided her hair in an intricate pattern, weaving silver thread through the dark strands. She looked like a princess. She felt like an imposter. "Steady," Vincent murmured beside her, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "They're more nervous than you are." Deanna glanced at him. He stood in full royal regalia, crown, ceremonial armor, the works, every inch the commanding king. But she'd seen him covered in mud, kneeling in the rain. She knew the man beneath the crown now. That made this easier somehow. Tomas Osborne stood and addressed the council. "Lords and ladies of Thornwick, we gather today to address the events of 2 days past. The return of the White Lichen, the revelation of Princess Deanna Thorne, and the proposed partnership between our king and the moon-blessed heir." Immediate murmuring broke out. Some council members nodded thoughtfully. Others looked furious or afraid. A portly man in expensive robes stood abruptly. "This is madness. We're being asked to accept the legitimacy of a girl who was tried and convicted of murder, a wolfless slave who somehow transformed into this creature. How do we even know she is who she claims to be?" "Lord Brennan," Vincent said coldly. "Or should I address you as the brother of the man currently awaiting exile for conspiracy to commit genocide?" Lord Brennan's face flushed red. "My brother's crimes are his own." "Are they?" Vincent interrupted. "Because the evidence my guards uncovered suggests your entire family profited from the Thornlands seizure. Your estate sits on what was once moon-blessed territory. Your wealth was built on stolen blood." Brennan sputtered, but another council member rose before he could respond. This one was a woman, elderly but sharp-eyed, dressed in the deep green of House Blackwood. "Lady Rachel Blackwood," she introduced herself, bowing slightly to both Vincent and Deanna. "I mean no disrespect, Your Majesties, but Lord Brennan raises a valid point. How do we verify Princess Diana's identity? The Thorne family was supposedly wiped out 20 years ago. How can we be certain this isn't some elaborate deception? The mark, Wilson Williamson said, stepping forward from his position near the door. The crescent moon and stars. That mark hasn't been seen in Thornwick for over 3 centuries. It only appears on those of pure moon-blessed blood. Marks can be faked, another noble muttered. Not that mark, an ancient voice said. Everyone turned. In the far corner sat an impossibly old woman, her face lined with a century of life, her eyes milky with age but still piercing. She'd been so still that Dina hadn't even noticed her. Elder Miriam, Vincent said with obvious respect, please, share your wisdom. The old woman rose slowly, leaning heavily on a gnarled walking stick. I am 107 years old. I was 27 when the last moon-blessed ruler sat on Thornwick's throne. I remember Princess Ilara Thorne, Dina's great-great-grandmother. She shuffled forward, her movements painfully slow but determined. The council fell silent, giving her space and time. The mark of the moon-blessed cannot be faked, Miriam continued. It is not paint or magic that can be learned. It is divine blessing, given by the moon goddess herself to those chosen to lead. I saw Princess Ilara's mark with these very eyes. I felt the power that radiated from her. She stopped before Diana, staring up at her with those clouded eyes. May I? She asked, raising one trembling hand. Dina nodded, kneeling so the old woman could reach her forehead. Miriam's fingers touched the mark, and immediately she gasped. Her eyes went wide, and for a moment, they glowed silver, reflecting the mark's power. Moon goddess, preserve us, she breathed. It's real. She's real. Tears streamed down her weathered face. I never thought I'd live to see this day. The prophecy fulfilled. The white lichen returned. She bowed deeply, an old woman showing reverence to one young enough to be her great-great-granddaughter. Long live Princess Diana Thorne, Miriam said, her voice carrying through the hall. Long live the moon-blessed. The effect was immediate. Council members who'd been skeptical now looked uncertain. Some stood and bowed. Others remained seated but looked troubled. Lord Brennan tried again. Even if she is who she claims, that doesn't give her the right to the throne. King Vincent is our rightful ruler, crowned by law and tradition, crowned by a throne stolen through genocide, Diana said, finding her voice finally. Every eye snapped to her. My family didn't die in some tragic accident. They were murdered. Systematically, deliberately, by King Edmund Watts, Vincent's father. Shocked silence. We have proof, Vincent added. He nodded to Wilson, who brought forward the journals and documents they'd recovered. Lord Julian Thorne documented everything. Edmund's corruption, his deals with enemy kingdoms, his embezzlement, his paranoia. When Julian tried to expose him, Edmund had the entire Thorne family killed and their lands seized. These are serious accusations, Lady Blackwood said carefully. Against a dead king who cannot defend himself. Then let his own words defend him, Diana said. She opened one of the journals, not her mother's, but one of her father's record books. This is a ledger of payments King Edmund made to Shadowland spies. Names, dates, amounts. Cross-reference it with the treasury records from that time. You'll see the money missing, the accounts that don't add up. She pulled out another document. This is a letter from Edmund to a Shadowland warlord, offering to share intelligence about Thornwick's military positions in exchange for gold and political support. It's written in his own hand. Compare it to any official document he signed, the handwriting matches. She laid out document after document, building an undeniable case. The council members leaned forward, examining the evidence with growing horror. He betrayed us, one noble whispered. Our own king betrayed the kingdom. And when the Thornes discovered it, Wilson added, Edmund had them killed to silence them. He declared them traitors when he was the traitor all along. Then he covered it up for 20 years, erasing an entire bloodline from history. Lord Brennan stood again, desperate now. Even if this is all true, and I'm not saying it is, what does it matter? King Edmund is dead. His crimes died with him. We can't punish a ghost, and we shouldn't tear down everything he built just to satisfy some ancient bloodline's claim to. Enough! Vincent said, his voice carrying the weight of alpha command. The effect was immediate. Every wolf in the room felt compelled to silence. Vincent stepped forward, removing his crown. Again. This time in front of the entire council. My father built his throne on genocide, he said clearly. He murdered innocents to steal power, and I inherited that stolen throne. For 6 months, I've worn this crown without knowing the truth of how it came to rest on my head. He placed the crown on the table before him. Now I know. And I won't compound my father's crimes by clinging to power that was never rightfully mine. Princess Diana Thorne is the legitimate heir to Thornwick's throne. The moon goddess herself has marked her as such. The white lichen has returned to restore what was stolen. Your Majesty. No. Several council members started to protest. Vincent raised his hand for silence. However, Princess Diana and I have agreed to rule as partners, co-regents, equal in authority, equal in responsibility. She brings the legitimacy of the moon-blessed bloodline. I bring knowledge of governance and military leadership. Together, we will rebuild what our fathers destroyed. This is unprecedented, Lady Blackwood said, though she sounded more intrigued than opposed. So is a white lichen transformation in front of 5,000 witnesses, Diana said dryly. We're living in unprecedented times. A younger council member stood, a man perhaps 30 years old with kind eyes. Lord Christopher Dyer of House Waverley. I speak for the coastal territories. He bowed to both of them. Your Majesties, I support this partnership. My family has always believed the moon-blessed bloodline was unjustly persecuted. If you're serious about reform, about making Thornwick a place of justice rather than fear, you have our full support. House Waverley's support is noted with gratitude, Vincent said. Others began to stand, pledging support. Not all of them. Lord Brennan and his allies remained stubbornly seated, faces set with anger. But enough. More than half the council was willing to give this partnership a chance. There will be conditions, Lady Blackwood said. The council will need guarantees. Laws protecting our rights and properties. Assurances that this partnership won't be used to seize power absolutely. Agreed, Diana said immediately. In fact, that's exactly what we're proposing. A new constitution. Written laws that even the rulers must follow. A council with real power to check royal authority. Courts that are truly independent. She could see Vincent looking at her with surprise. They hadn't discussed this specifically, but she'd been reading the books he'd given her all night. She'd seen how other kingdoms governed, how power could be balanced. The old way failed, she continued. Absolute power corrupted my family's throne, and then it corrupted King Edmund. If Vincent and I are going to rule together, we need a system that prevents that corruption from taking root again. Bold words, Elder Miriam said approvingly. But can you deliver on them? We can try, Vincent said. And that's more than my father ever did. The session continued for hours. Details were debated, concerns raised and addressed, compromises reached. It was exhausting, frustrating work, but it was also exhilarating. They were building something new, something better. By the time they broke for the day, they had tentative approval from 30 of the 43 council members. The remaining 13, mostly families who'd profited from the coup, were still resistant, but it was enough to move forward. As the council members filed out, Lady Blackwood approached Diana directly. A word, Princess? Of course. The older woman studied her carefully. You're very young to be proposing such sweeping changes. I'm young, Diana agreed. But I've lived at the bottom of this kingdom's hierarchy my entire life. I know what it's like when laws are just words that the powerful ignore. I know what it's like to have no voice, no protection, no hope. That gives me perspective that most rulers never have. Lady Blackwood smiled slightly. Indeed. My house will support your reforms, Princess. But be warned, the families who oppose you won't give up easily. They'll fight you every step of the way. Then we'll fight back, Diana said simply. After Blackwood left, Vincent approached with visible relief. That went better than I expected. You expected worse? I expected them to riot, Vincent admitted. Or demand immediate elections. Or just refuse to accept any of this. They're wolves, Diana said. Their instincts recognize the moon-blessed mark, even if their human minds resist. That buys us time to prove ourselves. Us, Vincent repeated, a small smile crossing his face. I like that. Dina realized what she'd said and felt her cheeks warm. I just meant, I know what you meant, Vincent said gently. And you're right. We're in this together. Before Deanna could respond, Wilson entered the hall quickly, his expression urgent. Your Majesties, we have a problem. A messenger just arrived from the northern border. The Shadowlands have heard about the White Lycan's return. Their warlord is demanding an audience. Vincent's expression hardened. That's not a request for an audience. That's a threat. What do they want? Dina asked. That's unclear, Wilson said. But the Shadowlands have been our enemy for generations. If they think the kingdom is unstable right now, they might see it as an opportunity to invade. Dina and Vincent exchanged glances. They'd barely had 2 days to establish their partnership, and already external threats were emerging. Send a reply, Vincent decided. Tell them we'll receive their messenger in 3 days. That gives us time to prepare. And to present a united front, Dina added. They need to see that Thornwick isn't weak or divided. They need to see the White Lycan and the King standing together. Wilson nodded and left to make arrangements. Vincent rubbed his temples, suddenly looking exhausted. This is never going to get easier, is it? Probably not, Deanna said. But at least we're not facing it alone. The sun was setting outside the palace windows, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In 3 days, they would face potential enemies. In the weeks and months to come, they would face opposition from within their own kingdom. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. A partnership born from tragedy, built on truth, and strengthened by shared purpose. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even stable yet, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, that's all you need. Chapter 9, The Shadowlands Envoy. 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Deanna spent every waking hour either studying with Vincent or training with Wilson. The studying covered everything from trade agreements to military tactics, from court etiquette to the history of Thornwick's conflicts with the Shadowlands. The training was different, learning to control her transformation, to summon the White Lycan at will rather than only in moments of extreme danger. It was harder than she expected. You're thinking too much, Wilson said as they stood in the palace's private training yard. Dawn had barely broken, and frost covered the ground. The transformation isn't logical. It's instinctual. You have to feel it, not force it. Deanna took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She'd transformed once when Wilson's claws had pierced her chest, when death had seemed certain. The moon goddess had awakened something ancient inside her. But now, trying to summon that power deliberately, she felt nothing. What if it only works when I'm dying? She asked, frustration creeping into her voice. What if that was a one-time thing? It wasn't, Wilson said firmly. The mark on your forehead proves that. The moon-blessed power is part of you now. You just have to learn to access it. How? Wilson was quiet for a moment, thinking. Lady Helena used to meditate. She said the wolf wasn't separate from her, it was part of her soul. She learned to commune with it, to understand it as another aspect of herself. Deanna closed her eyes, trying to follow that advice. She reached inward, searching for the presence she'd felt during the transformation. That overwhelming power, that ancient consciousness. For long minutes, there was nothing. Then, a flicker, like a candle flame in darkness. Something stirred deep in her chest, responding to her call. There, she thought. There you are. The presence grew stronger, more defined. She felt it like a second heartbeat, pulsing in time with her own. Not separate, not invading, just part of her. Part of who she'd always been, even when she didn't know it. Hello, she thought toward it. The response wasn't words exactly, more like emotions. Recognition, welcome, patience. The wolf had been waiting for her to find it. Deanna opened her eyes and felt the change beginning. Not violent this time, gentle, like water flowing downstream. Her bones shifted with a sensation more strange than painful. White fur rippled across her skin like moonlight on water. But she stopped halfway, maintaining a half-shifted form like the warriors in the fighting ring. Taller than her human form, but not the massive 8-foot beast from before. Claws instead of fingers. Enhanced strength and speed, but still able to think clearly, to speak. Good, Wilson breathed, eyes wide with approval. Very good, princess. That control took your mother years to master. Dina looked down at her transformed hands, paws tipped with silver claws. She felt powerful, but not overwhelmed by it. The wolf was there, present and ready, but she was still herself. Still in control. How do I shift back? Same process. Ask. Don't demand. Dina reached inward again, thanking the wolf, promising it would be called upon again soon. The presence receded willingly, and her body returned to human form with barely a ripple of discomfort. She staggered slightly as the transformation completed, and Wilson caught her elbow. It takes energy, he warned. You'll need to build up your stamina. Multiple transformations in a single day will exhaust you until your body adapts. How long did it take my mother? 6 months of daily practice, Wilson said. But she started training as a child. You're learning in days what should take years. I don't have years, Deanna replied. The Shadowlands envoy arrives today. I need to be ready. You're more ready than you think, Wilson assured her. By noon, the palace was in organized chaos. Servants rushed to prepare the throne room for the formal audience. Guards took positions at every entrance and exit. The High Council assembled in their formal robes, ready to witness whatever was about to unfold. Dina stood in her chambers while Sammy helped her dress for the occasion. The gown was magnificent white silk that seemed to glow in the light, embroidered with silver thread in patterns of moons and stars. It was a deliberate choice, making her moon-blessed heritage impossible to ignore. You look like a legend come to life, Sammy said softly, adjusting the final details. The stories they'll tell about today. You're going to be in history books, my lady. That's what terrifies me, Dina admitted. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I make everything worse? Then you'll fix it, Sammy said simply. That's what leaders do. They make mistakes and they fix them. You don't have to be perfect, princess. You just have to try. A knock at the door interrupted them. Vincent entered, also dressed formally, midnight blue and silver armor polished to a mirror shine, his crown sitting firmly on his head. He stopped short when he saw Deanna, his expression shifting to something she couldn't quite read. You look. He paused, searching for words. Like a queen. I'm not a queen, Deanna said. We agreed, co-regents, partners. Then you look like a partner who's going to make the Shadowlands think twice about threatening us. Vincent amended with a slight smile. Sammy excused herself, leaving them alone. Vincent approached, his expression growing more serious. Are you ready for this? No, Deanna said honestly. But I'll do it anyway. Good answer. Vincent reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped in cloth. I have something for you. It belonged to your mother. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a ring silver, set with a stone that glowed with soft white light, the same light as her mark. It's moonstone, Vincent explained. Extremely rare. Only found in moon-blessed territory. Your mother wore this as a symbol of her position. Wilson had it hidden away all these years, kept safe in case this day ever came. Deanna took the ring with trembling hands. It was warm to the touch, humming with faint energy. She slipped it onto her right hand, and it fit perfectly. For a moment, she swore she felt her mother's presence, warm, proud, loving. Thank you, she whispered. You're honoring her memory, Vincent said. Every day, with every choice you make, she would be proud of you. Before Deanna could respond, bells began to ring throughout the palace. 3 long tolls. The signal that the foreign envoy had arrived. Time to face our enemies, Vincent said, offering her his arm. Deanna took it, and together they walked toward the throne room. The throne room was magnificent, easily large enough to hold 200 people. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, painted with murals of Thornwick's history. Tall windows let in streams of afternoon light. The 2 thrones sat on a raised dais at the far end, Vincent's original throne and a new one, hastily commissioned but beautifully crafted, placed beside it at equal height. A symbol that couldn't be missed. Equal rulers. Equal power. The High Council lined both sides of the hall. Guards stood at attention, hands on weapons. Every eye watched as Vincent and Dina entered and took their positions on the thrones. Dina had never sat on a throne before. The chair was surprisingly uncomfortable hardwood, no padding. She supposed it was designed that way deliberately. A throne wasn't meant for comfort, it was meant for command. Tomas stepped forward, his voice carrying through the hall. His Majesty King Vincent Watts, first of his name, Her Majesty Princess Diana Thorne, the White Lichen, heir to the moon-blessed throne, co-regents of Thornwick. The formal announcement echoed off the walls. Admit the Shadowlands envoy, Vincent commanded. The massive doors at the far end opened. 4 figures entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Shadowlands warriors were different from Thornwick's Lycans. Where Lycans could shift between human and wolf forms, Shadowlands were born in their beast forms, and could never fully become human. The 4 warriors were massive, 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb light. Their eyes glowed red instead of amber. They moved with predatory grace, radiating menace. But it was the 5th figure that drew every eye. The envoy herself was tall and slender, wearing robes of deep crimson that trailed behind her like blood. Her face was partially obscured by a veil, but her eyes were visible black as night, cold as winter. She walked forward with absolute confidence, her warriors flanking her. When she reached the base of the dais, she did not bow. "I am Jaime Newman," she said, her voice smooth as silk and just as dangerous. "First advisor to Warlord Kane of the Shadowlands. I come bearing a message for the rulers of Thornwick." "Speak," Vincent said, his voice carefully neutral. Jaime's dark eyes moved from Vincent to Diana, lingering on the mark glowing on her forehead. Something flickered in her expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "The Shadowlands have heard interesting rumors," she said. "A white lichen has returned. The moon-blessed bloodline, thought extinct, lives again. This complicates things." "Complicates what exactly?" Dina asked, finding her voice. Jaime smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "The old treaties, the border agreements, they were made with the Watts dynasty. Now Thornwick claims to have 2 rulers, from 2 different bloodlines. Which treaties apply? Which agreements are valid? These are questions that must be answered." "All existing treaties remain in effect," Vincent said firmly. "The partnership between Princess Diana and myself doesn't invalidate previous agreements, doesn't it?" Jaime countered. "The moon-blessed bloodline has ancient claims to territories that currently belong to the Shadowlands, lands that were disputed 3 centuries ago. If the White Lichen has truly returned, those claims could be revived." A murmur ran through the council. Clearly, this was news to them. Diana felt Vincent tense beside her, but she kept her expression calm. The Shadowlands took those territories through conquest. That was 300 years ago. I have no interest in fighting old wars. "How reassuring," Jaime said, her tone making it clear she didn't believe it. "But Warlord Kine will need more than words. He proposes a demonstration." "What kind of demonstration?" Vincent asked, suspicion clear in his voice. "Single combat," Jaime said simply. "The White Lichen against one of our champions. If she wins, the Shadowlands will acknowledge Thornwick's strength and honor all existing treaties. If she loses," she smiled, "then we'll know the White Lichen is just a girl playing at Legends." The room exploded with noise. Council members shouting objections, guards shifting nervously, advisors arguing over protocol. Vincent stood, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Absolutely not. Princess Diana is not some prize fighter to be tested for your warlord's amusement. Then the Shadowlands will consider the treaties void," Jaime said coldly. "And our armies will test your borders instead. I wonder how your kingdom so recently fractured, so newly united will handle a full-scale invasion." Diana stood as well, drawing every eye. Her mark blazed brighter, responding to her rising emotions. "I accept, Princess." "No," Vincent started. "I accept the challenge," Dina repeated, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "Name your champion. Set the terms. I'll face them." Jamie's smile widened. Excellent. 3 days from now, in the old stone circle north of the capital, your champion against ours, witnessed by both kingdoms. Winner takes all. Agreed, Dina said before Vincent could object. Jaime bowed mockingly. We look forward to the entertainment. Long live the White Lichen. She turned and swept from the room, her warriors following. The moment the doors closed, the hall erupted again. Council members shouting, Vincent trying to restore order, advisors demanding explanations. But Deanna barely heard any of it. She was staring at her hands, at the ring her mother had worn, feeling the weight of what she'd just agreed to. A test. A challenge. A chance to prove that the White Lichen was real, or to fail and doom her kingdom to war. 3 days to prepare for a battle that could change everything. 3 days to become the legend they needed her to be. No pressure at all. Chapter 10. The White Lichen's Choice. The stone circle stood on a windswept plateau north of the capital, ancient pillars arranged in a perfect ring that had witnessed countless duels over the centuries. Today, it would witness something that hadn't been seen in 300 years, the White Lichen in combat. 3 days had passed in intense preparation. Deanna trained from dawn until she could barely stand, pushing her transformations, learning to fight in her lichen form. Wilson drilled her relentlessly, teaching her to use her enhanced speed and strength, to think like a warrior rather than a survivor. But now, standing in the center of the stone circle, with thousands of spectators gathered around the perimeter, all that training felt inadequate. Vincent stood beside her, his expression tight with worry. You don't have to do this. We can call it off. Prepare for war instead. War would kill thousands, Dina said quietly. This way, only one of us risks death. The math is simple. The math is that I might lose you, Vincent said, his voice rough with emotion. We've barely started building this partnership. Whatever this is between us. I don't want to lose it before we've had a chance to see what it could become. Deanna looked at him, startled by the raw honesty in his words. Over the past week, they'd grown close late nights studying together, early mornings planning reforms, moments of unexpected laughter amid the chaos. She'd started to see him not as the son of her family's murderer, but as Vincent. Just Vincent. And she'd started to feel something she had no name for, something warm and frightening and entirely new. Then I'll win, she said simply. I didn't survive 22 years of slavery and 3 warriors in a fighting ring just to die now. Vincent's hand found hers, squeezing briefly. Your mother would be proud of you. I'm proud of you. Before Deanna could respond, horns sounded from the Shadowlands contingent. Jamie Newman stepped forward, her crimson robes billowing in the wind. The Shadowlands champion approaches. The crowd parted, and Deanna's breath caught. The creature that entered the stone circle wasn't fully beast or fully human, it was something in between, something wrong. 8 feet tall, covered in matted black fur, with elongated limbs that ended in claws like daggers. Its face was a nightmare fusion of wolf and something else, something ancient and monstrous. Red eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence. That's not a lichen, Wilson breathed, horror in his voice. That's a void touched. They're corrupted, infected with dark magic. Moon goddess. They brought a void touched as their champion. Is that even legal? Tomas demanded. There are no rules in single combat, Jamie said smoothly. Only victory or death. Surely the legendary White Lichen isn't afraid. The void-touched creature made a sound between a growl and a laugh, scraping its claws against the stone. The sound made Deanna's teeth ache. Vincent moved to step forward, to call this off, but Deanna caught his arm. I can do this, she said, with more confidence than she felt. Deanna, trust me. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Understanding, faith, partnership. Vincent nodded slowly and stepped back. Deanna walked to the center of the circle. The void-touched creature circled opposite her, anticipation radiating from its twisted form. Tomas raised his voice, addressing both crowds. Single combat between the White Lichen of Thornwick and the Shadowlands champion, to the death or surrender. May the moon goddess witness this trial. Begin, Jamie commanded. The void-touched lunged immediately, moving with horrible speed. But Deanna was ready. She reached inward, calling to her wolf, and felt the transformation surge through her. White fur erupted across her skin, her bones reshaped, muscles expanding, power flooding every cell. But this time, she maintained full consciousness, full control. The white lichen rose in its full glory, 8 feet of pure moon-blessed power, glowing with silvery light that made the void-touched creature recoil. The two titans collided in the center of the circle with a sound like thunder. The void-touched was strong, its claws tearing through stone where Dina had been standing a heartbeat before. But it was wild, chaotic, fighting on instinct and rage. Dina fought with purpose. She dodged a swipe that would have torn her throat out, countering with a strike to the creature's ribs that sent it staggering. It recovered quickly, spinning with unnatural speed, but Deanna was already moving, using her smaller size, smaller than this monstrosity, at least to her advantage. Like fighting Peggy Wright, she thought. Speed over strength, precision over power. The battle raged across the stone circle. The void-touched caught her shoulder with its claws, drawing blood that glowed silver as it fell. Deanna responded by grabbing its arm and using its own momentum to throw it against one of the standing stones. The impact cracked the ancient pillar. The crowd roared, Thornwick cheering for their white lichen, Shadowlands warriors howling for their champion. But the void-touched was getting stronger. Dark magic pulsed from its form, corrupting the very air around it. Where its blood touched the ground, the grass withered and died. Deanna felt it, trying to invade her mind, whispers of despair, memories of pain, visions of failure, all her years of suffering as a slave weaponized against her, the torture in the dungeons, the loneliness, the hopelessness. "You're nothing," the dark magic whispered. "You were always nothing. A wolfless slave playing at being a princess. You'll fail them all." For a moment, she faltered. The white lichen's light dimmed. Then she heard Vincent's voice cutting through the darkness. "Deanna, you're more than what they made you. You're more than your pain." And she remembered. Her mother's journal. "Be strong. My darling girl, be brave." Her parents, dying to protect her. Wilson, confessing his crimes and seeking redemption. Vincent, kneeling in the mud when he could have chosen power. Eula, looking at her with gratitude for protecting an innocent. Every person who'd put their faith in her, who believed she could be more than a victim. The mark on her forehead blazed like the sun. "I am Deanna Thorne," she roared, her voice shaking the stone circle. "Daughter of Helena and Julian. Survivor. Princess. White lichen. And I am done being afraid." The light exploded from her, pure moon-blessed power that drove back the void-touched's darkness. The creature shrieked, covering its eyes, stumbling backward. Dina didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, her silver claws finding the creature's heart, driving through corrupted flesh to the core of its being. The void-touched made one final sound, half scream, half sigh, and then dissolved into black mist that the wind scattered across the plateau. Silence fell across the stone circle. Dina stood in her white lichen form, breathing hard, glowing with power. Blood, both silver and black, covered her fur. The mark on her forehead pulsed like a second sun. Then the crowd erupted. Thornwick wolves howled their approval, the sound rolling across the plateau like a storm. Common people cheered until they were hoarse. Even some of the council members stood, bowing in respect. Jaime Newman's expression was unreadable behind her veil, but she stepped forward and bowed deeply. "The white lichen has proven herself. The Shadowlands acknowledge Thornwick's strength. All treaties remain in effect. Warlord Kane's word is given." She turned to leave, but Deanna's voice stopped her. "Wait." Deanna transformed back to human form, standing naked and covered in blood in the center of the circle. Someone, Sammy, rushing forward, wrapped a cloak around her immediately. "Why did you really come here?" Deanna asked. "This wasn't about treaties or territories. What did the Shadowlands actually want?" Jaime studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled, a real smile this time. Warlord Kane wanted to know if the legends were true, if the moon-blessed power was real, or just stories used to frighten children. If you were truly blessed by the moon goddess, or just another pretender. And now? Now he knows, Jaime said simply. And that changes everything. The balance of power in this realm has shifted. War is no longer inevitable, but neither is peace. What comes next depends entirely on what you do with the power you've been given. She bowed again. We will be watching, White Lichen. All of us will be watching. The Shadowlands contingent departed, leaving Thornwick to celebrate their victory. Vincent reached Deanna, pulling her into his arms despite the blood and the crowd watching. You did it. Moon Goddess. You actually did it. We did it, Deanna corrected, leaning into his warmth. This partnership, I couldn't have been strong enough without knowing you believed in me. Always, Vincent said fiercely. I will always believe in you. They stood together in the center of the ancient circle while their kingdom cheered. Two rulers bound by tragedy and hope, building something new from the ashes of the old. 1 month later, the fighting ring was gone. In its place, a garden was taking shape. Workers planted trees and flowers, installed benches and walking paths. At the center, where the blood-stained sand had once claimed so many lives, a memorial was being constructed, white marble carved with names. Every person who died unjustly, every victim of King Edmund's reign, every name that had been erased from history, they would all be remembered now. Deanna stood at the edge of the construction, watching the sun set over the transformed space. She wore simple clothes, a tunic and trousers, no crown or jewelry except her mother's ring. After a month of formal gowns and throne room audiences, she'd learned to steal these quiet moments when she could. Thought I'd find you here, Vincent said, joining her. He'd also abandoned his formal attire, looking more like a man than a king in worn leather and comfortable boots. I keep thinking about who I was when they dragged me through those gates, Deanna said quietly. A terrified slave girl who thought she was going to die. And now you're the White Lichen, Vincent finished. The woman who defeated a void touched. The princess who's revolutionizing Thornwick's legal system. The partner who keeps me honest when I'm tempted to take shortcuts. Deanna smiled. You make it sound so grand. Most days I still feel like I'm making it up as I go. We both are, Vincent admitted. But we're doing it together, and that makes all the difference. They'd accomplished so much in 1 month. Slavery had been officially abolished throughout the kingdom. The justice system had been reformed with independent courts and juries. The High Council had been expanded to include elected representatives from the common people. Land seized during King Edmund's reign was being returned to the rightful families or their descendants. It wasn't perfect. There was still resistance from nobles who'd lost power, still prejudice against the formerly wolfless, still corruption to root out, but it was progress. Real, measurable progress. I found something today, Vincent said, pulling a letter from his pocket. It was in my grandmother's effects, sealed with instructions to open it if you survived the Shadowlands challenge. Deanna took the letter carefully. The seal bore Queen Mother Isolda's crest. She broke it open and read, My dearest children, if you're reading this, then the impossible has happened. Not once, but twice. The White Lichen returned, and my grandson found the courage to kneel rather than cling to stolen power. I knew you both before you knew each other. I saw you, Vincent, struggling with your father's legacy, trying to be a good king while hating the throne you sat upon. And I felt you, Deanna, though I never met you, the lost princess, surviving in shadows, carrying your parents' strength even when you didn't know their names. You were always meant to find each other. The Moon Goddess writes in mysterious ways, but her hand has been guiding you both from the beginning. Build something beautiful together. Build something worthy of the sacrifices that brought you to this moment. And know that I am proud of you, both proud beyond words. Love transcends death, just as truth transcends lies. Your partnership is proof of that. All my love. Isolde. Deanna's vision blurred with tears. She knew. She knew this would happen. She hoped, Vincent corrected gently. She had faith that we'd make the right choices when the time came. Did we? Deanna asked. Make the right choices, I mean. There's still so much resistance, so many people who think this partnership is a mistake. Vincent took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. We chose truth over lies, justice over power, mercy over revenge, partnership over conquest. Those are the right choices, Deanna. The fact that they're difficult doesn't make them wrong. Dina looked at their joined hands, at the ring her mother had worn, at the man who'd knelt in the mud and offered her redemption instead of more suffering. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said quietly. "Is that allowed, in this partnership of ours?" Vincent's breath caught. "I think I fell in love with you the moment you stood in that ring, bloodied and broken but still refusing to bow. I just didn't have the words for it yet." He turned to face her fully, his golden eyes intense. "So yes, it's allowed, more than allowed, if you'll have me not as your co-regent or your partner in governance, but as something more. I would be honored." Dina laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "You're asking permission? You're a king. Kings don't ask permission," Vincent said, smiling. "But men in love do. And right now I'm just a man, hoping the woman he loves feels the same way." Dina answered by pulling him down into a kiss. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, a kiss that tasted like hope and new beginnings and everything they'd fought so hard to build. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had set completely. The twin moons rose over Thornwick, their silver light washing over the transformed garden that had once been a place of death. "What happens now?" Dina asked. "Now we keep building," Vincent said. "We face down the nobles who resist us. We negotiate with other kingdoms. We continue reforming laws and helping people, and trying to be worthy of the power we've been given." "That sounds exhausting." "It will be," Vincent agreed. "But we'll do it together. Partners. Equals. And maybe, if we're very lucky, something more." Dina leaned into his warmth, watching the moonlight play across the memorial garden. Her parents were buried in the royal cemetery now, their names restored, their legacy honored. The Thorn Manor was being rebuilt as a monument to the moon-blessed line. The journals her father had hidden were being transcribed and distributed, ensuring the truth would never be erased again. She'd started as a slave, became a prisoner, transformed into a legend, found her family's legacy, claimed her birthright. But most importantly, she'd found herself, found her strength, found her voice, found someone who saw her not as a symbol or a bloodline, but as Deanna, just Deanna, and that was enough. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the capital settling in for the night. Children laughing, musicians playing, people living their lives in a kingdom that was slowly, painfully, becoming a place where justice meant something again. "Your mother wrote that you would bring change," Vincent said softly. "She was right. We brought change," Dina corrected. "You could have fought me, could have defended your stolen throne. You chose to share power instead. That took more courage than any battle." "Then we're both courageous," Vincent said. "Which is good, because we're going to need it." They stood together in the moonlight, two rulers who'd become partners, who'd become friends, who'd become something more. Two people building a kingdom on truth instead of lies, on justice instead of fear, on hope instead of despair. It wasn't the ending of a story. It was the beginning of a reign that would be remembered for centuries, the beginning of a love that would reshape a kingdom, the beginning of a new era for Thornwick, and somewhere, in whatever realm the dead inhabit, Helena and Julian Thorne smiled. Their daughter had not just survived. She had thrived. She had become exactly who she was always meant to be, the White Lichen, the moon-blessed, the princess who chose mercy over revenge, partnership over conquest, love over hate, and Thornwick would never be the same. Epilogue. 5 years later, the twins were born at dawn, just as their grandmother had been born a generation before. Dina held them both, wrapped in soft blankets embroidered with moons and stars. A boy and a girl, both perfect, both marked with the crescent moon on their foreheads glowing softly, proof that the moon-blessed line would continue. Vincent sat beside her on the bed, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his children. "They're beautiful. They're perfect. You're perfect. You're—" "I'm exhausted," Dina corrected, but she was smiling, and sore, and probably going to sleep for a week. "But yes, they're perfect." The door opened quietly, and Wilson entered, now gray-haired but still strong. "May I see them, Your Majesties?" "Come meet your niece and nephew," Deanna said warmly. In the 5 years since the Shadowlands challenge, Wilson had become family. Not just a captain or an advisor, but genuinely family. He'd helped raise Deanna, teaching her everything he'd taught her mother, trying to atone for his crimes by ensuring the next generation grew up loved and protected. He looked down at the twins, and his tough warrior's face crumpled. Helena would have loved them so much. She does love them, Deanna said gently. Wherever she is, I know she's watching, proud of what we've built. And they had built so much. Thornwick was thriving, trade flourishing, laws protecting the vulnerable, education available to all children regardless of birth. The partnership between the Moonblessed and Watts bloodlines had become legendary, inspiring other kingdoms to seek similar balanced governance. There were still challenges, still nobles who resented the changes, still conflicts with neighboring realms, still days when Deanna wondered if she was truly worthy of the crown she shared with Vincent. But she had him. She had Wilson. She had advisors like Tomas and Lady Blackwood. She had friends like Sammy and Eula, both now holding important positions in the palace administration. And now, she had these two perfect children, carrying both bloodlines, representing the future she and Vincent were building together. What will you name them? Wilson asked. Deanna looked at Vincent, and he nodded, giving her the honor. Helena, Deanna said, touching her daughter's tiny hand. For my mother. And Julian, she added, touching her son. For my father. May they grow up in a kingdom worthy of their names. They will, Vincent promised. Because we'll make sure of it, all of us, together. The sun rose higher outside the palace windows, painting the room in shades of gold and rose. A new day. A new generation. A new chapter in Thornwick's history. The White Lycan's legacy would live on not just in legends and songs, but in laws that protected the weak, in courts that served justice, in a kingdom where every life had value. Deanna closed her eyes, holding her children close, feeling Vincent's arms around them all. She thought of her parents, sacrificing everything for a daughter they barely knew. She thought of her years as a slave, suffering that had taught her compassion. She thought of the fighting ring, where she'd died and been reborn. Every moment of pain, every impossible choice, every terrifying transformation, all of it had led to this perfect, peaceful moment, to this family, to this future. Thank you, she whispered to her mother's spirit, to the moon goddess, to fate itself. Thank you for bringing me home. And in the light of a new dawn, with her family beside her and a kingdom at peace, Deanna Thorne, once a slave, now a queen, finally allowed herself to believe what everyone else had known all along. She was exactly where she belonged. Before you go, Deanna went from property to princess, from powerless to powerful. But which transformation was more important, the White Lycan, or the woman who chose partnership over conquest? I'm curious what you think. Comment below.